In the beginning, before there was form, before there was light, there was only chaos. This primordial void, a vast expanse of nothingness, existed without structure, without order. It was from this emptiness that everything we know, every god, every hero, every land, would eventually emerge. From the silent darkness, the first seeds of existence were planted, and from those seeds would grow the gods, beings of unimaginable power, who would shape the world in ways no mortal could ever comprehend. The first among these was Gaia, the earth itself, a being both immense and nurturing, yet capable of profound destruction. Her very presence gave birth to the universe as we know it, to the mountains, the oceans, the heavens above, and the very foundations of the earth. And from Gaia's union with the sky, Uranus, the Titans were born, immense, powerful, and eternal. They were the first rulers of the cosmos. Yet, even they, the very first children of the earth, were destined to fall under the weight of their own actions, caught in a ceaseless struggle for control of the universe. For the gods of Greek mythology, however, there were no simple tales of creation. No, theirs was a story woven with conflict, betrayal, and unrelenting ambition. A story where even the mightiest were brought low by prophecy, and where the future of the world hinged on the actions of a single god, whose name would echo through the ages, Zeus. This is the story of the gods, the legends that birthed a civilization, a tale of power, love, betrayal, and revenge. A story that stretches across time and still resonates with us today. This is the story of ancient Greece. Hey there, I'm glad you're here. In today's video, I will take you through the timeline of the story of ancient Greece, exploring how the world was shaped by the gods, heroes, and the great wars that defined a civilization. We'll begin with the creation of the cosmos, then dive into the rise of the Olympian gods and the epic battles that followed, including the Trojan War. We'll also look at the heroes who shaped the mythic landscape and the powerful city-states that defined Greek history. As we move through this journey, make sure to leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. We'd love to know. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on more fascinating stories from history. If you're not ready to subscribe yet, kindly let us know why in the comments section. We would love to hear your thoughts. In the beginning, before the first flicker of light, before the first breath of life, there was chaos. But this was not a mere void, an absence to be filled. In Greek mythology, chaos was something far more profound. It was the very essence of the cosmos before form and order. It was the first principle, the raw material from which everything that was to come would emerge. Unlike many other creation myths, where the universe begins from a formless entity like water or a deity shaping the world from a pre-existing substance, chaos in Greek thought represents a state of boundless potential, a chaotic expanse pregnant with possibility, yet devoid of structure. The ancient Greeks saw chaos not as emptiness, but as the source of all things, both beautiful and destructive. From this swirling void, everything else would be born: light, darkness, the earth, the heavens, and the divine beings who would come to rule over all of creation. But chaos was not simply a passive force, waiting for the gods to shape it. It was, in a sense, the very fabric of the universe itself, teeming with the raw potential for creation and destruction. Unlike other cultural mythologies, where a god or cosmic being might fashion the world from a solid element, Greek mythology presented a world in which order arose from disorder, a theme that would echo through their philosophy and understanding of life. Chaos is where everything began, and it was from chaos that the first gods emerged. However, this was not a peaceful birth. It was a birth full of tension, creation, and conflict. From chaos came Gaia, the earth, an entity of unimaginable power, representing the fertile grounds from which all life would eventually spring. But Gaia was not alone in her vast domain. Alongside her emerged Uranus, the sky, and from their union, the Titans were born, massive and powerful beings who would eventually rule the cosmos. Yet, despite their strength, even they were bound by the forces of chaos. For in Greek thought, there is always a tension between creation and destruction, order and chaos. As the Titans grew in strength and number, their reign became marked by violence. It was the first battle of divine succession, one that would shape the entire course of Greek mythology. Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, overthrew his father Uranus in an act of brutal rebellion. But this act of violence, like all things born of chaos, would not go unchallenged. It was not long before prophecy reared its head. Cronus, fearing that one of his own children would overthrow him in the same way he had dethroned Uranus, consumed each of his offspring immediately upon their birth. This fear of being overthrown, of losing his power, reflected the core of Greek cosmology, that the natural order, while it could be shaped by the gods, was always in danger of being disrupted by the forces of fate and chaos. And yet, even in such a universe of fear and destruction, there was a flicker of hope. Zeus, the youngest of Cronus' children, was hidden away by his mother, Rhea, and raised in secret. His escape marked the beginning of a new cycle. As he grew, so too did his power, and in time, Zeus would return to confront his father and free his siblings from the belly of Cronus. This dramatic return of Zeus was no simple act of defiance. It was the moment when the cosmic order was restored, yet with a twist. In Greek mythology, order did not mean a static, eternal peace. Rather, it was the constant struggle to balance the forces of creation and destruction to maintain harmony amid the perpetual push and pull of chaos. When Zeus overthrew Cronus, the world was divided. This was not a peaceful division, but a carefully orchestrated splitting of power. The world was torn between Zeus, who took the skies and heavens, Poseidon, who ruled the seas, and Hades, who presided over the underworld. With this division came the foundation of the Olympian order. Yet, even this order, built from the very fabric of chaos, was not permanent. The gods themselves would continue to challenge one another, often resorting to deceit, rebellion, and war to maintain their dominance. Even as they shaped the world, they were shaped by the very forces they sought to control. This tension between the gods, between order and chaos, would be a recurring theme in the lives of the gods and heroes who followed. Thus, from chaos came the birth of the gods, the eternal struggle between creation and destruction, and the realization that the cosmos was not some peaceful, ordered place, but a living, breathing entity, one that was forever in flux. The Greeks understood that the world itself, in all its beauty and brutality, was born from the very forces of chaos, where light and dark, love and hatred, life and death, constantly swirled in an unending dance. This understanding would permeate every aspect of their mythology, from the mighty Olympians to the tragic heroes, and it would form the foundation of their worldview, that the cosmos, like life itself, was a delicate balance, forever teetering on the edge of chaos. Long before time was measured, or the stars claimed their place in the sky, there was chaos, a vast and formless expanse, devoid of structure or design. It was not nothingness, but rather an infinite potential, teeming with the power to give birth to everything yet to come. From this primordial chaos, Gaia, the earth, emerged. First among the gods, embodying the fertile, nurturing force that would shape and sustain all life. She was the solid foundation, the mother who would give rise to all living things, but also a force capable of profound change and destruction. Gaia was, in many ways, the very essence of stability, grounded, enduring, and eternal. But Gaia was not alone. From the chaotic expanse, there arose Uranus, the sky, an entity of immense and limitless reach. His arrival was not a quiet one. It was as if the heavens themselves, vast and infinite, had stretched to embrace the earth. The pairing of Gaia and Uranus represented a perfect symmetry in Greek mythology, a balance between the finite and the infinite, the tangible and the abstract. Gaia symbolized the firm ground beneath our feet, while Uranus embodied the unbounded heavens above, a union that would give birth to a new world. Yet, the union of earth and sky, so essential to the foundation of existence, was not without its tensions. Unlike the peaceful union of deities in other mythologies, where creation begins as an act of cooperation, the relationship between Gaia and Uranus was defined by an underlying conflict, a struggle between the Earth's fixed nature and the expansive, untouchable vastness of the sky. This tension, while unseen, would quietly shape the events to come. Gaia's creation of Uranus to cover her was not merely a physical act. It was symbolic of the need for balance in the cosmos. Gaia was the foundation, yet she needed the sky to protect and shelter her. Together, they were two halves of a whole, each incomplete without the other. But Uranus, in his overwhelming power, sought to dominate rather than protect. Over time, his presence became stifling. As he stretched endlessly above her, he began to imprison Gaia's children, the Titans within her, fearing their strength and growing power. This act of imprisonment would be the seed of conflict, the first spark in the fire that would burn through the fabric of the cosmos. The imprisonment of the Titans beneath the earth was a moment of profound betrayal. It marked the first fracture in the balance between Gaia and Uranus, a fracture that would eventually lead to the downfall of the sky itself. Gaia, in her pain, conceived a plan, a way to strike back at her oppressive partner. She crafted a sickle, sharp and unforgiving, and called upon her children to rise against Uranus. It was Cronus, the youngest and most ambitious of the Titans, who answered her call. With Gaia's help, Cronus overthrew Uranus, castrating him and thus ending the reign of the first ruler of the cosmos. The sky, once expansive and unchallenged, was torn apart. Uranus's blood spilled into the sea, and from it, the goddess Aphrodite would emerge, signifying that even in violence, there is creation. This dramatic act of castration, while violent and brutal, symbolizes a profound shift in Greek mythology. Uranus's severance from Gaia not only ended his reign, but also symbolized the breaking of an eternal bond. The heavens and the earth, once inseparable, were now divided. The tension between the cosmic and the terrestrial, the infinite and the finite, would be a recurring theme in Greek mythology, and it began with the union and the eventual betrayal of Gaia and Uranus. This first act of rebellion was not the end, but the beginning of a cycle of succession and betrayal that would define the world of the gods. After the fall of Uranus, Cronus took his place as ruler of the cosmos. Yet, like Uranus before him, Cronus would become fearful of the very power that had allowed him to overthrow his father. In a desperate attempt to preserve his rule, Cronus consumed each of his children upon their birth. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, fearing that one of them would rise up against him, just as he had once done. This fear, born from the very cycle of power, would eventually lead to his own downfall. For as Zeus, the youngest of his children, was hidden away, the seed of his rebellion was sown. And so, the cycle of betrayal and power struggles began, fueled by the tensions that were born between Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky. Theirs was a relationship that mirrored the Greek view of the world, unpredictable, ever-changing, and full of conflict. Yet, despite the violence and the struggle, this tension would lead to the unfolding of the cosmic order, a system where each generation of gods would rise, fall, and be replaced by the next, forever ensuring that the world, like the cosmos itself, would remain in a state of constant flux. Thus, the union and subsequent betrayal between Gaia and Uranus laid the groundwork for the eternal struggles that would define the gods' relationship with one another, as well as the lives of mortals. Their story is not just one of creation, but of transformation, a reminder that even in the most sacred unions, the seeds of destruction and rebirth are often hidden, waiting to burst forth. In the beginning, there was chaos, a vast, formless expanse without shape or structure. From this boundless void, the first beings emerged, and among them was Gaia, the earth. Born from the primal depths, Gaia was both the foundation of existence and the nurturing force that would bring all life into being. She was the first deity to stand upon the earth, a constant, unyielding presence, giving shape to the mountains, seas, and fertile plains. And from her, the first unions were formed, one of which was with Uranus, the sky. Uranus, vast and boundless, covered Gaia completely, forming a union that seemed, on the surface, to be the very embodiment of balance. The earth and sky were united in perfect harmony, with the heavens stretching infinitely above the solid, fertile ground below. From this union, the Titans were born, immense, powerful beings who would come to rule the cosmos, the earth, and the seas. But there was more to this union than mere physical harmony. As their children grew, so too did their strength. Uranus, fearful of the power his offspring possessed, chose to imprison them within the deepest recesses of Gaia's body. The sky, once a protector of the earth, became a prison for Gaia's children. The tension between the heavens and the earth grew palpable. Gaia, the mother, the nurturer of life, was now both the creator and the sufferer of that creation. She felt the weight of the earth's injustice and the grief of being unable to protect her children. It was in this agony that Gaia crafted a sickle, sharp and gleaming, made from the strongest of metals, adamantine. This weapon was not merely a tool of violence, it was a symbol of her rage and the need for change. The act that was about to unfold was one that would shatter the divine status quo and set the course of the universe on a path toward chaos and renewal. Gaia turned to her children, the Titans, and implored them to rise against Uranus, to free themselves from his tyrannical rule. But the Titans hesitated. It was only Cronus, the youngest and most ambitious of the Titans, who responded. Driven by the promise of power and the love for his mother, Cronus armed himself with the sickle. He approached Uranus as the sky stretched overhead, blind to the consequences of his actions. With one swift, violent motion, Cronus castrated Uranus, severing the heavens from the earth, in an act so brutal that the universe itself seemed to tremble at the shock waves of its power. The act was one of both creation and destruction. The severing of Uranus symbolized the overthrow of an older order by a younger generation, a theme that runs through all of Greek mythology. The old gods, who had once been unchallenged in their rule, were now undone by the very children they had once feared. Uranus, the once immovable sky, was now powerless, rendered impotent, and unable to fulfill his role as the protector of the earth. His reign was over, and with his fall came the ascension of a new ruler, Cronus, who would now govern the cosmos. Yet, in the violent aftermath of Uranus's castration, the world was changed forever. The blood of Uranus spilled into the sea, and from that very blood, Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and love, emerged. Her birth from the foam symbolizes an essential paradox of Greek mythology. From destruction, creation can arise. From violence, beauty, and love can emerge. Aphrodite's very existence speaks to the Greek belief that creation is not linear or peaceful, but cyclical. Life and death, beauty and violence, love and destruction are intertwined in a never-ending dance. For Uranus, the consequences were nothing short of catastrophic. His power was stripped away, and he was banished from the realm of the gods. No longer would he rule the sky. His reign was over. But for the cosmos, the effects were far-reaching. The heavens and earth, once in perfect union, were now divided, a rupture that would echo through all of Greek mythology. The balance between the divine and the mortal world was shattered, and with it came the inevitability of future conflicts that would shape the very nature of the gods. Cronus, having overthrown his father, now ascended to rule, yet the very fear that had driven Uranus to violence would soon take root in his own heart. For Cronus, now king of the gods, would learn that the cycle of power and fear would continue. He too, like his father before him, would be haunted by the prophecy that one of his own children would rise up against him, and thus, the same cycle that had torn Uranus from the heavens would eventually unravel Cronus's reign. In this way, the act of Uranus's castration was far more than a mere rebellion. It was the beginning of an eternal cycle of divine succession. The Greeks understood this cycle as a reflection of the world itself. Creation and destruction were forever intertwined. The heavens may fall and new gods may rise, but the forces of chaos and order would always find balance, shifting one generation of gods for the next, ensuring the world was never static, always in flux. Thus, Uranus's fall was not simply a personal tragedy. It was the moment of transition in Greek mythology, the breaking of an old order and the creation of a new one. And in this cosmic upheaval, the seeds were sown for the trials and triumphs of the gods, the heroes, and the mortals who would follow, locked in a never-ending struggle between power, fate, and the whims of the universe. The rise and fall of Cronus, his rise to power, his fearful rule, and eventual downfall, are at the heart of one of the most fundamental themes of Greek mythology, the inevitable cycle of succession. This cycle, built on the tragic tension between power and fate, was not just a story of gods fighting for dominance. It was a reflection of the very nature of existence itself, one where nothing, not even the gods, could escape the inexorable pull of change and destiny. Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, was born into a world already full of tension and violence. His father, Uranus, ruled the heavens with an iron fist, keeping his children imprisoned beneath the earth, out of sight and out of power. Uranus was a ruler unchallenged, but the Greek gods, even in their earliest forms, were marked by one immutable fact: nothing lasts forever. Cronus, even as a child, had already inherited a deep resentment for the oppressive rule of his father. The heavens had become a prison, and the world seemed suffocated beneath the rule of one who feared the growing strength of his own children. It was Gaia, the earth, who, after suffering the pain of watching her children trapped in the bowels of the earth, first called for change. The act of castrating Uranus was, in one sense, an act of liberation. But it was also a stark betrayal, an unmaking of the old world and the birth of something new. The violence of Uranus's fall symbolized a rupture, not just in the cosmic order, but in the very nature of existence. The old order, ruled by the gods of the sky and the earth, was violently displaced by the new, and Cronus was there to claim the throne. In the wake of this shift, Cronus ascended as ruler, but this triumph was tainted. Unlike his father, whose reign had been marked by fear and oppression, Cronus believed that in order to avoid the fate that had claimed Uranus, he must preserve his rule at all costs. Fate, in the form of a prophecy, would be his undoing, much like it had been for Uranus. It was foretold that Cronus's own children would rise up against him, just as he had overthrown Uranus. This prophecy haunted Cronus in ways that defined his reign. Fear of prophecy drove Cronus to acts of tyranny more extreme than anything Uranus had done before. His desire to preserve his power became an obsession, one that led him to commit acts so cruel they mirrored the very actions of the tyrant he had once overthrown. He swallowed each of his children as they were born. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, each one devoured in an attempt to eliminate the possibility that the prophecy would come true. Rhea, his wife, watched in horror as her children were taken from her, helpless against the unstoppable will of her husband. The psychological toll of this act is important to understand. Cronus wasn't just afraid of being overthrown. He was gripped by a deep paranoia, a fear that the natural course of succession would inevitably come for him. His actions reveal a recurring theme in Greek mythology. No one can escape their fate, not even the gods. The desire to defy fate, to cheat it, only leads to deeper tragedy. Cronus's paranoia wasn't merely about power, it was about control. His obsessive need to prevent the prophecy shaped every decision he made, but in doing so, he sealed his own fate. And yet, even in his paranoia, Cronus was blind to one fundamental truth: that the cycle of power in Greek mythology is inevitable. The gods are born, they rise to power, and they fall, only to be replaced by those who come after them. The gods themselves, despite their immense power, are not exempt from the eternal forces of change. Fate is inescapable. The rise of the new gods, the Olympians, would come, not through Cronus's will, but through the very forces he feared. When Rhea finally gave birth to Zeus, she could not bear to see him swallowed by Cronus. In an act of defiance against her husband's tyranny, Rhea hid Zeus away on the island of Crete, where he was raised in secret, far from the reach of his father. From this moment on, the cycle of rebellion and prophecy that had started with Uranus would come full circle. As Zeus grew, he would return to challenge Cronus, to free his siblings, and to take his place as the new king of the gods. The very prophecy that Cronus sought to suppress would, in the end, bring about his destruction. This chain of events, in which the old order is overthrown by the younger generation, is central to Greek mythology. It reflects the eternal cycle of creation and destruction that governs the universe. Each generation of gods must inevitably give way to the next, not by choice, but by the very nature of fate. And for Cronus, this was his tragic flaw. His fear of the future, his paranoia, and his tyranny led him to undermine the very legacy he sought to preserve. As Cronus rose to power, the very foundations of the cosmos seemed to shift beneath him. He had overthrown Uranus, his father, and in doing so had claimed the throne of the gods. His victory was not just a battle for supremacy, but the violent assertion of a new era, a cosmic succession that would reshape the heavens. And yet, despite his newfound dominion, Cronus was haunted by a fear that grew ever more insistent, gnawing at his mind as the days stretched on. This fear was not of enemies or rebellion from without, but of a prophecy, one that foretold his own downfall at the hands of his own children. This fear was not idle. It was rooted in a deep and unyielding understanding of the nature of succession in the divine world. The Greek gods, powerful as they were subject to an eternal cycle, a cycle that demanded the younger generation would eventually rise to overthrow the older. This was not just the story of Cronus and his father. It was the very essence of divine order, the natural progression of life and power. And in the case of Cronus, this was a progression he could neither escape nor control. Cronus had already experienced the brutal truth of this cycle. He had overthrown Uranus, his father, in an act of rebellion that shattered the sky itself. It was a violent act, born out of necessity, but one that could never undo the fact that the very forces that had empowered his ascension, violence and rebellion, would ultimately define his reign. The overthrow of Uranus, though it had granted him supreme power, had come with an unsettling consequence: the constant tension between the generations of gods. This tension, like a wave rising inexorably toward the shore, would crash upon Cronus with the same force that had torn Uranus down. The fear of prophecy, the knowledge that one of his children would overthrow him, was not simply an act of paranoia. It was rooted in the very philosophy of Greek mythology. The gods were never meant to remain in power indefinitely. In the Greek view of the universe, all things, gods, empires, and even the heavens themselves, were in a constant state of flux. The cycle of life and death, the balance between creation and destruction, could never be avoided. Power, no matter how absolute, would eventually be passed on, even if it had to be taken by force. In his fear, Cronus chose to act. But unlike Uranus before him, who had chosen to imprison his children out of fear of their strength, Cronus's actions were not just driven by his fear of the prophecy. They were driven by a need for control, an intense paranoia that led him to swallow each of his children as they were born. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, swallowed whole by their father in a desperate attempt to preserve his reign. This violent, irrational act was born from a fundamental misunderstanding of power. Cronus, like Uranus before him, believed that he could escape fate by controlling it, by eliminating the source of his fear before it could manifest. And yet, in doing so, he sealed his own fate. By trying to stop the cycle, he ensured that it would continue. The moment he swallowed his children, he began the chain of events that would ultimately lead to his downfall. For the very act of consuming them, of denying their existence, was a denial of the natural cycle of succession and change that governed the universe. But there was another layer to Cronus's fear. It was not just about the loss of power. It was about the loss of legacy. The idea that his line, his bloodline, might not continue, that he might be replaced by a younger, stronger force. For the Greeks, the passing of the torch from one generation to the next was not just a political event. It was the very essence of existence. Life begets life. Death begets new life. Cronus's refusal to accept this cycle, his desperate attempts to hold on to power, was symbolic of a broader, existential crisis. The refusal to let go and allow the universe to evolve. The irony of Cronus's actions is that, in trying to preserve his rule, he inadvertently set in motion the very cycle of overthrow that had been prophesied. The Greek gods could never escape the forces of rebellion and succession. Cronus had been born of the same cosmic cycle that had allowed him to defeat Uranus, and that same cycle would eventually bring about his own downfall. His fear, his desperate, consuming fear, would be his undoing. And yet, this fear is not merely the fear of a father protecting his children. It is the fear of change itself. Cronus, in his attempt to deny change, trapped himself in a cycle that he could not escape. His rule, built on the foundation of violence, rebellion, and fear, would eventually crumble beneath the weight of the very forces he had sought to suppress. The younger generation, represented by Zeus, the child who escaped his grasp, would rise to challenge him, to fulfill the prophecy, and to take the mantle of power. For in Greek mythology, the fear of the older generation is not simply about power. It is about the inevitability of change, the inevitability of the next generation rising. It is the cycle of life itself, and no force, not even that of the gods, can resist it. The birth of Zeus was not a singular moment. It was the spark of fate itself, a destiny shaped by the very forces of the universe that governed all the gods. Yet, despite the power he would one day wield, his birth was hidden in shadow, surrounded by secrecy and deception. For his mother, Rhea, had already watched her other children swallowed whole by their father Cronus, the Titan king who ruled the cosmos with an iron fist, driven by his deep-seated fear of prophecy. The prophecy that one of his own children would rise up to overthrow him was a constant haunting that darkened his reign, a fear that made him act in irrational violence. When Zeus was born, the ancient cycle of power, prophecy, and succession was set into motion, yet the gods could not be certain of its outcome. Rhea, knowing that Cronus would do the same to this child, acted swiftly and decisively. She could not bear to see another child swallowed by the father who feared them. Zeus's birth, like all events of great consequence in Greek mythology, was marred by sacrifice and secrecy. In the dead of night, Rhea secretly took Zeus and hid him in the caves of Crete, far from Cronus's reach. To deceive Cronus, Rhea gave him a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes, a token meant to trick him into believing that he had swallowed the child. Cronus, in his ignorance, consumed the stone, and in doing so, sealed the fate of his rule. For in his desperate attempts to cling to power, he unwittingly set the stage for his own destruction. The stone was a symbol of Cronus's failure, an act that, in its very deception, would be the precursor to the war for control of the cosmos. Zeus, though hidden away in Crete, was not destined to remain in secrecy forever. His survival, shielded by his mother and the very earth, was the beginning of the great cosmic rebellion that would one day overthrow Cronus and reshape the heavens. But it was not only fate and prophecy that shaped Zeus's destiny. It was also the wisdom and training he received in his early years. Raised in the caves of Crete, Zeus was not just the child of Rhea and Cronus, but the embodiment of potential, a force whose power and destiny were yet to be realized. The gods knew of his survival, but they also knew that he was not yet ready to challenge Cronus. For in the shadows of Crete, Zeus learned not just how to survive, but how to lead. His early years were marked by education, by learning the arts of strategy and wisdom, tools that would serve him well when the time came to confront the mighty Cronus. Zeus was raised under the careful tutelage of the Curetes, warriors who shielded him from any threat, and the nymphs who provided him with divine nourishment, the milk of Amalthea, the goat who fed him with the power of the gods themselves. It was this early care that imbued him with the strength to surpass his father, and to one day rise to lead the Olympians. Zeus's education was not just about learning how to fight or wield power. It was about learning the balance of power, how to use wisdom as much as strength. Metis, the titaness of wisdom, later came to teach him the secrets of the gods, preparing him for his future role as the king of the heavens. As Zeus matured, his leadership qualities became evident. He was not just strong, he was charismatic and strategic. traits that would become crucial in the coming war with Cronus. The gods, who had long feared Cronus's tyranny, began to rally to Zeus, seeing in him not just the son of their old oppressor, but the one who could bring about the change they so desperately needed. The young god's rise was not just one of strength, it was one of inspiration. Zeus's ability to unite those who had suffered under Cronus's rule was the first test of his true leadership. Zeus's early years in Crete also molded him in ways that would shape his actions for millennia. It was here that he learned not just the arts of war, but also the art of deception, an essential tool for a leader destined to challenge the most powerful of the Titans. In the face of overwhelming odds, Zeus learned to outthink his enemies, as well as rally his allies to his cause. His journey from hidden child to god-king was not simply one of power, it was one of shrewdness and self-realization. As Zeus grew, so did his understanding of his role in the cosmos. The prophecy that had once loomed over his life, dictating the course of his destiny, was now something he would actively fulfill. He was no longer a passive child, hidden from the world. He was the future king of the gods, the one who would rise up to challenge his father, Cronus, and lead the Olympians in the Titanomachy, the war for control of the heavens. The journey of Zeus was not just about physical strength, it was about his mental and emotional evolution. From the depths of secrecy to the heights of Olympus, Zeus's path was one marked by wisdom, leadership, and the eventual overthrow of the father who had once swallowed his siblings. The gods, whose lives were dictated by cycles of power and rebellion, would now find in Zeus not just a king, but a leader who would transform the heavens. His upbringing on Crete was the crucible in which his true nature was forged, preparing him for the monumental battle ahead. The war for the heavens between Zeus and Cronus was not simply a battle of gods. It was the culmination of prophecy, the fulfillment of the inevitable cycle of succession that governed the very fabric of the cosmos. For generations, the gods had fought for supremacy, but this was different. This was not merely about overthrowing a tyrant. It was about restoring balance to a world that had been stifled by the oppressive reign of the Titans. And at the center of this conflict stood Zeus, the child who had escaped death, the son who would lead the charge against his own father. The first step in the ultimate battle for power had already been set in motion the moment Zeus had been hidden away in Crete, away from Cronus's consuming paranoia. From that moment on, Zeus's rise was not just about strength, it was about strategy, wisdom, and justice. The gods knew the prophecy. They had felt the weight of it in their very souls. One child would overthrow the tyrant father, but Zeus was no child anymore. He had matured into a leader, wise beyond his years, and prepared for the challenge ahead. The key to the battle was not just raw power, it was the liberation of his siblings. They had been swallowed whole by Cronus, trapped within his belly, as if locked away in the deepest prison of the gods. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, all had been taken from the world by their own father's fear, leaving the gods incomplete, fractured, unable to rise up against the rule of the Titans. And yet, Zeus knew that in order to defeat Cronus, he could not simply rely on his strength. He had to free his family, for only by standing united could the gods hope to challenge the power of the Titans. Zeus's plan was calculated, a mixture of wisdom, deception, and divine assistance. Armed with a potion created by Metis, the Titaness of wisdom, Zeus would force Cronus to regurgitate his siblings, breaking the grip of the tyrant and restoring the unity of the Olympians. But there was something deeper in this moment than just the physical act of freeing his siblings. This was about restoring justice to a world that had been torn apart by fear, secrecy, and oppression. The moment that Cronus swallowed the stone, thinking it was Zeus, was the moment of his blindness. Cronus, in his paranoia, was so consumed with the idea of preventing the prophecy that he missed the signs of his own undoing. And now, with Zeus's intervention, the stone he swallowed became a symbol of his own falsehood. The very act that he thought would ensure his reign was the one that marked its end. When Zeus's siblings emerged from their father's body, fully formed, powerful, and unbroken, it was a sign that the gods were united, and they would not let Cronus stand in their way. Zeus had not only freed his siblings, he had given them the power to fight back, to reclaim their rightful place in the cosmos. And as the gods stood together, they realized that their strength was not just in their individual might, but in their unity, in their shared purpose to restore order to a world that had been ruled by fear and tyranny. With his siblings freed and ready for battle, Zeus's next move was to assemble an army, a divine coalition that would include the Cyclopes, the skilled artisans of the gods, and the 100-handed ones, the powerful beings who had been imprisoned by Cronus. These monstrous beings were not just tools of destruction, they were the embodiment of the power that had been suppressed for so long, the force of chaos that could be harnessed to bring about cosmic change. Together, they were the unstoppable force that would challenge the old order, and they stood united under Zeus's leadership. The war between the Olympians and the Titans was a battle of cosmic justice, a war not just for the throne, but for the restoration of balance. Zeus, as the leader of the Olympians, symbolized the divine right to rule, based on wisdom, justice, and the natural order of the gods. Cronus, on the other hand, represented the old ways, a reign built on fear, tyranny, and the desire to control the future. The ultimate clash between father and son was not just a contest of power, it was the battle for the soul of the universe itself, the battle to restore order to a cosmos ruled by chaos. When the dust settled and Cronus was overthrown, the world was forever changed. The Olympians stood victorious, and with Zeus at their helm, the gods took their rightful places in the heavens. But this victory was more than just a power struggle. It was the restoration of justice. The reign of Cronus, built on fear and the oppression of the younger gods, was over, and in its place stood a new era, one where justice, freedom, and the natural progression of the gods would reign supreme. Zeus's act of liberation, the freeing of his siblings and the overthrow of Cronus, was not just about defeating a tyrant. It was about restoring balance to the universe. It was about bringing about the cosmic justice that the gods had long been denied under Cronus's rule. In Greek mythology, justice was not merely about righting wrongs. It was about restoring order, balance, and the natural flow of power. Zeus, as the king of the gods, embodied this ideal. His rise was not just a personal triumph, but the restoration of cosmic order, the triumph of justice over tyranny, of the younger generation rising to restore balance to a world that had been corrupted by the old order. The Thermopylae, the war that defined the fate of the cosmos, was not just a battle for power. It was a cosmic reckoning that marked the culmination of millennia of divine conflict. The Titans, though mighty, had become oppressive, and their time had come to an end. The Olympians, led by Zeus, had triumphed, but their victory was not simply about defeating Cronus and the old gods. It was about restoring balance to a world that had been corrupted by fear, control, and tyranny. As the smoke of battle cleared and the gods stood victorious, the question arose, what now? The cosmos had been shaped by the reign of Cronus, whose dominion over the heavens, the earth, and the seas had brought order. Yet, that order had been marked by oppression and violence. The gods now stood at the precipice of a new era, and the question of how to divide the vast realms of the universe would set the tone for the world that would follow. The division of the world was no simple task. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades had emerged victorious, but their shared legacy of fatherly rebellion, the overthrow of Uranus by Cronus, and the subsequent overthrow of Cronus by Zeus, had left a deep scar on their relationship. There were no simple alliances here. Each god would have to claim a domain that resonated with their very essence. The way the realms were divided reflected their personal attributes, their sense of justice, and their destinies. Zeus, the eldest and the most powerful, was granted dominion over the heavens, the sky, and the thunder, symbolizing his role as the ultimate arbiter of justice. The sky, in Greek mythology, was not just the realm above the earth. It was where fate was decided, where power was wielded, and where the forces of the cosmos were in constant flux. To rule the sky was to rule the very essence of divine will. It was the highest realm in the cosmos. But it was also a realm burdened by responsibility. Zeus had fought long and hard to free the gods from Cronus's reign, and with his victory came the monumental task of ensuring that the cycle of tyranny never repeated. As the chief of the gods, Zeus was not merely a ruler, he was the guardian of justice. In the sky, he could hear the cries of the oppressed, and he would never allow the heavens to be tainted by the corruption that had marked the reign of Cronus. Poseidon, the second brother, was given dominion over the seas, a realm that reflected his chaotic nature. The oceans, deep and unpredictable, were both a source of life and destruction. Poseidon's reign over the seas was not one of quiet rule. It was a realm that required constant vigilance and strength. The sea, like Poseidon himself, could be a place of calm and beauty, but it was also a place of tempestuous fury. The ancient Greeks saw the seas as a force of both creation and destruction, a constant ebb and flow that mirrored the very nature of existence. Poseidon's control of the seas made him a god of great power, but also a god burdened by the uncontrollable chaos that defined his realm. The seas were a place where nature was at its most untamed, and Poseidon, in his power, had to learn to balance the forces of life and death. Then there was Hades, the youngest of the brothers, who was given dominion over the underworld. The realm of the dead was often misunderstood, portrayed as a place of suffering and eternal darkness. But for Hades, it was simply a realm of order and finality. The underworld was necessary for the cycle of life. It was where the souls of the dead would go to be judged and to find their final resting place. Hades did not rule the underworld in malice. He ruled it with a sense of inevitability and duty. The underworld was where the balance of the cosmos was maintained, and without it, the cycle of life and death would be incomplete. Hades' rule was not one of tyranny, but of justice, ensuring that all souls received the fate they deserved. The division of the world, then, was not just an allocation of territories. It was a reflection of the Greek understanding of balance. Each god's domain represented not just their power, but their responsibility. Zeus's rule over the heavens was a responsibility to ensure that the forces of fate and justice were upheld. Poseidon's rule over the seas was a responsibility to manage the chaotic forces of nature and to ensure that the seas remained a source of life and sustenance. Hades' rule over the underworld was a responsibility to maintain the balance between life and death, ensuring that the souls of the departed were properly judged and placed in their rightful place. This division, with each god claiming their rightful place, ensured that the cosmos was in balance. No one god ruled alone. Instead, they each held power over different aspects of the world, creating a system where the forces of life, death, creation, and justice could exist in harmony. The Greek understanding of the cosmos was one of constant interconnectedness, where the actions of one god affected the whole. The division of the world reflected the understanding that power, though vast and omnipotent, must always be tempered by responsibility. The Olympian gods were not just the rulers of the cosmos, they were the embodiment of the forces that shaped the world and human society. Each god, by virtue of their domain, personified a fundamental aspect of existence, weaving together the physical and metaphysical realms of nature, society, and human emotion. But even as they stood at the pinnacle of divine power, they were not immune to the internal conflicts that mirrored the very forces they controlled. Their personalities, often defined by their connection to their realms, shaped not only the way they interacted with the natural world, but also with each other and with the mortals they governed. Zeus, as the king of the gods, was the lord of the heavens and the sky, and his rule embodied the ideals of justice and order. The sky, with its infinite vastness, was not just a symbol of his power, but a reflection of his responsibility. In the heavens, Zeus wielded the thunderbolt, a weapon of immense power, yet the very element that represented his might also spoke to the burden of his leadership. Zeus's role as the arbiter of justice meant that he was not simply a ruler by power, but by moral authority, an authority that had to be upheld with fairness, yet tempered by the will of the gods and the needs of mortals. However, Zeus was not without his struggles. Beneath his calm and authoritative exterior lay a deep fear, a fear of repeating the cycle of violence that had led to his own rise. Just as he had overthrown his father, Cronus, so too would his children one day rise to challenge him. The fear of betrayal, the same fear that had driven Cronus to swallow his children, haunted Zeus's every decision. His relationships with his siblings, Poseidon and Hades, were complicated by this anxiety. Though they shared in the victory of the Titanomachy, each god's domain carried its own tensions and desires. Zeus's relationship with Hera, his wife and sister, was marked by jealousy, not just because of her rivalry with other gods, but also because of Zeus's own affairs, which created friction within the divine family. Poseidon, the god of the seas, was the embodiment of chaos and passion. The seas, both a source of life and destruction, reflected his personality, untamable, tempestuous, and driven by impulse. Poseidon, though equally powerful, never quite shared Zeus's sense of order. His domain over the seas gave him unmatched power, but also placed him in constant opposition to the forces of calm and stability. Unlike his brother Zeus, Poseidon was more individualistic. His rule over the seas represented both his strength and his mistrust of the hierarchical structure the Olympians were building. Poseidon's anger, often a catalyst for storms and earthquakes, was as volatile as the ocean itself. His relationship with Zeus was complex. Both were powerful gods, yet Poseidon's temper often put him at odds with the more strategic and diplomatic Zeus. Hades, the third brother, was the ruler of the underworld, and his domain was perhaps the most misunderstood of the Olympians. As the god of the dead, Hades represented not evil, but the necessary end of life. His realm was one of balance, a place where souls were judged and given their final resting place. But Hades was not a tyrant. He was a god of order and finality. His cold, reserved nature made him the least understood of the Olympians, yet he was integral to the functioning of the cosmos. The underworld symbolized the natural cycle of life and death, a cycle that must be respected if true balance were to exist. Hades did not seek to destroy, but to preserve the cycle. His relationship with his brothers, Zeus and Poseidon, was marked by a quiet, unquestioning loyalty, but also a sense of detachment. He ruled his realm alone, keeping his distance from the often tumultuous disputes of the heavens. Hera, the goddess of marriage and family, was the embodiment of order and commitment. Her realm was not just about relationships, but about preserving stability within the family structure. Hera's dominance over marriage represented the societal ideals of commitment, loyalty, and the sacred bond between spouses. Yet Hera was far from the serene goddess of domestic peace that her realm suggested. Her personality, deeply tied to her domain, was one of fierce protectionism, especially in the face of Zeus's infidelities. Hera's jealousy, her constant battle to preserve the sanctity of marriage, reflected the complex and sometimes chaotic nature of human relationships. Her love for her children, especially Ares, her god of war, was tempered by the sacrifices she had to make for the greater good of the gods, showing the tensions between personal loyalty and divine duty. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, war, and craft, represented the balanced approach to warfare, one that emphasized strategy, intelligence, and discipline rather than mindless destruction. Athena's personality was that of rationality and calm resolve. Her connection to strategy and planning gave her dominion over both military strategy and the arts of civilization, the intellectual side of human society. Athena's wisdom, forged from both divine insight and human ingenuity, allowed her to be a patron of cities and crafts, places where order and reason could be used to create rather than destroy. Her rivalry with Ares, the god of chaotic war, reflected the ongoing tension in human society between reason and passion. In contrast to Athena's calm rationality was Ares, the embodiment of violent war and chaos. Ares' domain reflected the destructive nature of war, its bloodshed, anger, and chaos. His personality was driven by the primal force of battle, and he embodied the recklessness that could tear societies apart. Unlike Athena, who sought to strategize and bring order, Ares thrived on chaos and the thrill of battle, making him an unpredictable force in both the mortal and divine realms. His desire for destruction was mirrored in his domain, the battleground, where lives were lost and families destroyed in the name of war. The Olympian gods, though immortal and all-powerful, were not simply faceless figures of divine authority. They were deeply humanized, shaped not only by their immense strength, but also by the conflicts, passions, and flaws that mirrored those of the mortal realm. Their relationships were marked by the same emotions and tensions that govern human behavior: love, jealousy, rivalry, and betrayal. But within the divine hierarchy, these emotions played out on a cosmic scale, affecting not just their interactions with each other, but also the very balance of the universe. At the center of the Olympians stood Zeus, the king of the gods. His rule was built not just on power, but on his ability to maintain order in a world that had been shattered by the chaos of Cronus's reign. Zeus's leadership was defined by a delicate balance of strength and wisdom, but it was also fraught with internal conflict. Though Zeus was the most powerful of the gods, his rule was not unchallenged. He had overthrown his father, Cronus, yet the shadow of that act hung over him. His own children, his potential successors, would one day rise to challenge him, just as he had risen to challenge Cronus. Zeus's fear of losing his authority was compounded by the jealousy and rebellion that brewed among the gods. The tension between his desire for justice and his need to maintain control over his family and his rule was a recurring theme. His relationship with Hera, his wife and sister, was one of the most complex. While their marriage was central to the divine order, it was often marked by betrayal. Zeus's many affairs, both divine and mortal, stirred Hera's jealousy and resentment, making her a frequent challenger of his authority. Hera's actions were not driven merely by jealousy, however. They were born from a deep sense of honor and duty to the god's sacred bonds of marriage. Her vindictive nature often clashed with Zeus's leadership, as she would undermine his plans or punish his infidelities in subtle and strategic ways. Their dynamic reflected the tensions of human relationships, where love could easily be corrupted by possessiveness and betrayal. Poseidon, the god of the seas, shared a different kind of rivalry with Zeus. As the god of the oceans, Poseidon controlled one of the most powerful forces in nature, but his independence often put him at odds with Zeus's vision of unity and order. Though Poseidon was loyal to Zeus during the Titanomachy, his domain was vast and unruly, much like his own personality. The sea, like Poseidon, was wild, unpredictable, and untamable. There were moments when Poseidon's temper, his desire for more power, his frustration with being relegated to the seas, caused friction between the brothers. This rivalry was never one of open conflict, but rather an undercurrent of tension, where Poseidon's pride and ambition would occasionally surface. Poseidon, the god of the oceans, was not easily confined to the hierarchical structure Zeus tried to enforce over the gods. In contrast to Poseidon's raw, untamed power, Hades ruled the underworld, where the forces of life and death were in constant balance. Hades was often seen as a solitary figure, removed from the squabbles of the Olympians. But this separation did not mean alienation. His realm was one of finality, where the dead were judged and the balance between life and death was maintained. Unlike Zeus and Poseidon, Hades did not covet power or seek dominance. His personality was measured, serene, and stoic. And while he did not actively challenge Zeus's authority, his isolation from the affairs of the other gods spoke to a sense of resignation, a quiet acceptance of his role in the grand scheme. His relationship with his brothers was one of mutual respect, though it lacked the dynamic energy of the relationship Zeus had with Poseidon and Hera. The rivalry between Athena and Ares reflected the complex nature of war itself. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategy, represented the more rational and controlled aspects of warfare, victory achieved through intellect, discipline, and foresight. Ares, by contrast, was the god of the brutality and chaos of war, driven by bloodlust and the thrill of battle. Their contrasting approaches made their rivalry not just one of personal animosity, but one of fundamental philosophical disagreement. Athena's calm and calculated leadership in battle was at odds with Ares's reckless and violent nature. Though they were both gods of war, their emotional and intellectual approaches to conflict were so different that their rivalry became a symbol of the tension between reason and passion in human society. Demeter and Artemis, though not as involved in the political struggles of the Olympians, were still integral to the divine hierarchy. Demeter, the goddess of agriculture and fertility, embodied the nurturing and life-giving forces of nature. Her relationship with her daughter Persephone reflected the sacrifice and maternal love that characterized her role. Yet Demeter's grief at Persephone's abduction by Hades revealed the fragility of divine family bonds. Artemis, her daughter, represented the wild and independent side of nature. As the goddess of the hunt and the moon, Artemis was an untamable force, fiercely protective of her independence and the creatures she vowed to protect. While Demeter nurtured life, Artemis stood as a guardian of the wild, untouched and autonomous, resisting the constraints of divine society. Finally, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, represented the desire and passion that transcended even the other gods' ambitions. Aphrodite's relationships, especially with Ares, were filled with seduction, rivalry, and passion, reflecting the complexities of love, from lust to deep affection. She was not just a passive figure of beauty, Her power was the one that could unite or tear apart the gods and mortals alike. Her presence in the divine court was a reminder that love was not a force of purity or peace. It was as dangerous and transformative as any other divine power. In the age when the world was still raw, formed from the chaos of the Titans' war, Prometheus, the Titan of foresight, stood apart from his kind. The Olympians had established their reign, and the world was still finding its balance. But Prometheus, with his vision of the future, looked upon the earth below, barren and empty of true life, and saw that the creatures of the world were not living to their fullest potential. They lacked reason, purpose, and most importantly, connection to the divine. They were beings of instinct, of flesh and bone, bound to the earth in a way that denied them the ability to reach toward the stars. Prometheus's decision to create humanity was born from a deep compassion, a belief that humanity had the potential for something greater. In his hands, he shaped clay into the first humans, molding their bodies as an artist might craft a statue. Yet, it was not merely the act of shaping that gave them life. Prometheus breathed life into them, infusing them with the spark of the divine, the essence that connected them to the gods themselves. By using clay, Prometheus was linking them not only to the earth, the very foundation of their existence, but also to the divine realm. Clay, as the primordial substance of the world, symbolized the connection between the material and the spiritual, the mortal and the immortal. The creation of humanity was not just about physical form. It was about infusing the earthly with the divine spirit. But Prometheus's creation was not without its consequences. The very gift he gave humanity, reason, intelligence, the spark of creativity, was one that would shape their future in ways both magnificent and terrifying. Humanity was not created to be passive. They were imbued with the ability to reason, to question, and most importantly, to rebel. This divine gift set humanity apart from all other creatures, and it made them capable of challenging the gods themselves. It was this very potential that would eventually lead to their defiance, as well as their rise to greatness. Yet, Prometheus's act of creation was one that was deeply personal. He saw the potential in humans, but he also knew that his creation would set them on a path of struggle, where their connection to the divine would come at a cost. He was not naive about the burden that he was bestowing upon them, nor the responsibility it would place on his own shoulders. By giving humanity the gift of reason, he had created a race that would one day dare to challenge the gods. He knew that this act would not go unnoticed by Zeus, the ruler of the gods, whose own reign was marked by an iron-fisted control over the universe. Zeus, who had once defeated his father Cronus to claim the throne of the gods, was not one to tolerate insubordination, even from those who had helped him rise to power. Zeus's reaction to Prometheus's act of creation was immediate and furious. Prometheus's creation of humanity threatened the cosmic order that Zeus had worked so hard to establish. The gods, in their divine realm, were the supreme beings, and the very thought that mortals might become self-aware, independent, and capable of challenging divine authority was unacceptable. The creation of humans not only symbolized a potential rivalry between gods and mortals, but it also undermined Zeus's absolute control over the universe. He had tolerated the actions of the Titans, but Prometheus had crossed a line. In giving mortals the gift of reason, Prometheus had set in motion a future where the gods might no longer be unquestioned rulers. Zeus, in his anger, would punish Prometheus, binding him to a rock, where an eagle would feast on his liver for eternity. Yet, even in the face of this punishment, Prometheus never regretted his decision. His love for humanity had been genuine. He believed that the gift of life, though fraught with hardship and struggle, was worth the risk. He had created humans not to be mere slaves to the gods, but to be free-thinking beings who would shape their own destiny. Prometheus was a trickster, yes, but he was also a figure of compassion and foresight. His creation of humanity was both an act of love and an act of rebellion. Rebellion against the gods who sought to keep humanity in darkness, and against the very idea that mortals should remain ignorant and enslaved. As humanity grew, their connection to the divine would be both a blessing and a curse. They would rise, they would fall, but they would never again be enslaved to the whims of the gods. Prometheus's creation had forged a link between the mortal and divine realms, and that link would forever change the nature of the cosmos. Humanity, now capable of reason, would shape the world in their image, just as the gods had shaped it in their own. But this potential for greatness would come with the weight of responsibility, a responsibility that Prometheus himself had shouldered by giving humanity the gift of fire, the gift of knowledge, the gift of freedom. The gift of fire, the first and most significant act of rebellion, was not merely a practical tool. It was a symbolic catalyst that would ignite a profound transformation in humanity. To give fire to mortals was to give them the spark of life, the divine breath that would elevate them from mere creatures of instinct to beings capable of reason, art, and innovation. In the hands of humanity, fire would become the torch of civilization, the flame of creation, and the source of their ability to reshape the world. But why was fire such a significant gift? To the gods, fire was a sacred element, the divine domain of the immortal beings, kept away from mortals as a symbol of their higher status. The gods, especially Zeus, saw fire as the boundary between the mortal and the divine, and giving it to humans threatened to dissolve the distinction between the two realms. Prometheus, however, saw fire as a gift of freedom, a symbol of progress and enlightenment. By giving fire, Prometheus did not merely provide heat for warmth or light to see. It was the key to civilization, the tool that would allow humans to rise above their primal state and venture into the realm of knowledge and artistry. With fire, humanity could forge weapons, build empires, cook food, and even create art, capabilities that were essential to their survival and their growth. But fire also symbolized hope and rebirth, a force capable of both creating and destroying. This duality was a powerful symbol of humanity's potential, its ability to transcend its limitations while also facing the dangers of hubris. In giving fire, Prometheus opened the door to both human greatness and human fallibility, a tension that would define the entire mortal experience. However, in giving fire to humanity, Prometheus did more than just change their physical circumstances. He altered their very essence. No longer would they be merely subjects of the gods' whims, bound to the earth as passive beings. With fire, they would rise to become agents of change, capable of defying the divine, questioning the gods, and ultimately shaping their own destinies. In this way, fire was the ultimate tool of autonomy. It was a gift that represented both empowerment and rebellion. But Zeus, the ruler of the gods, saw the gift as a direct challenge to his authority. Fire, in Prometheus's hands, was not just a physical force. It was the beginning of human independence. Zeus, who had carefully constructed a hierarchical order where the gods reigned supreme and mortals obeyed their divine will, could not allow such a rebellion to stand. The act of defying the gods, by giving fire to humans, was an act of cosmic treason, a disruption of the divine order that Zeus worked tirelessly to maintain. Prometheus had undermined the gods' control, and Zeus could not tolerate such an affront. to the natural hierarchy. Thus, Zeus's punishment of Prometheus was both necessary and symbolic, an act of divine justice meant to restore balance to the cosmos. Bound to a rock, Prometheus was condemned to have his liver devoured by an eagle every day, only for it to regenerate each night. This eternal torment was meant not only to punish Prometheus for his rebellion, but to serve as a warning to humanity. The gods may grant gifts, but they also have the power to take them away. The punishment emphasized the divine prerogative, that the gods controlled both life and death, and no mortal, not even one as wise as Prometheus, could defy their will without consequence. However, Zeus's punishment was also revealing of the Greek gods' complex relationship with humanity. The gods were not entirely indifferent to mortals, nor were they wholly compassionate. They offered blessings, but these blessings were always tempered by the fear that mortals would become too powerful, too independent, and perhaps too self-sufficient. The gods ruled over humanity with a careful balance, guardians of progress, yet also enforcers of limitations. Prometheus's punishment highlighted this delicate relationship. The gods were willing to provide mortals with gifts, but only within the boundaries they set. The divine gift of fire, as much as it symbolized humanity's potential, also served as a reminder that no gift from the gods was without strings attached. Prometheus's act of defiance also spoke to the Greek understanding of justice, that there were consequences for actions, even those driven by compassion. Prometheus's gift to humanity was pure, but it was also an act of rebellion that could not be allowed to go unchecked. Zeus's punishment was, in a sense, an enforcement of divine law, an expression of the need for order in the cosmos. Yet, it also revealed the paradox of the gods' relationship with mortals. The gods were capable of love, but their love was always conditional, tempered by their need to control the forces of the world. The relationship between Zeus and Prometheus, as well as the relationship between gods and mortals, embodied the central tension of Greek mythology: autonomy versus submission, freedom versus control, and the cost of knowledge. Prometheus gave humanity the ability to rise above their station, but this act of empowerment also came with a heavy price. In the end, the gift of fire represented not just the dawn of human progress, but the sacrifice that would be required to achieve it. The 5 ages of man, as described by Hesiod in Works and Days, offer not just a historical account of humanity's development, but a moral and spiritual decline that reflects the changing relationship between mortals and the divine. Hesiod's depiction of this descent is not a linear one, but a symbolic cycle, where humanity's initial closeness to the gods is gradually lost, and each successive age reflects a turn away from divine guidance toward an increasingly corrupted state. Through these ages, Hesiod paints a picture of human potential, both its rise and its eventual fall. At the beginning, there was the Golden Age, a time when humanity was in perfect harmony with the gods. In this age, the world was governed by peace and abundance. The people lived without hardship or sorrow, their lives marked by an unbroken connection to the divine. They did not need to labor or suffer because nature provided abundantly for them. This age was a time of innocence, a reflection of the ideal human condition, a world untainted by human vice or sin. In Hesiod's narrative, this was a golden time that was nearly perfect in every respect. The people were blessed by the gods, and justice was carried out without question, as the gods walked freely among the mortals. However, as with all golden things, the Golden Age came to an end. The next stage in the cycle, the Silver Age, was marked by a decline in both the moral and spiritual nature of humanity. Though still under the gods' protection, humans now had to work for their sustenance. The earlier carefree existence gave way to more struggles, though not as hard as in later ages. selfishness and pride crept into their hearts, and they began to fall out of favor with the gods. In the Silver Age, the gods no longer shared in the closeness they once had with humans, and the virtue of the people was now in question. Divine favor was no longer easily attained, and though humans were still blessed with long lives, the presence of discord and the slow development of vices marked the beginning of their downfall. The Bronze Age, as depicted by Hesiod, saw humanity reach a tragic low, dominated by warfare and violence. These were people who lived not for peace or prosperity, but for glory and battle. They were fierce and strong, but their strength was not tempered by reason. This was the age of brutality, where humans were defined by their savagery rather than their wisdom. The Bronze Age men were shaped by strength, but that strength was devoid of righteousness. It was a world where violence defined interactions, and the pursuit of power came at the expense of all other virtues. The gods had withdrawn their guidance, and humanity was now driven by its own instincts, descending further into moral chaos. This age highlighted the danger of unchecked ambition, where the pursuit of victory was everything, and any form of peace was out of reach. Then came the Iron Age, the age Hesiod lived in, a time when the fall of humanity seemed complete. Moral decay was now total. The people of the Iron Age were cursed with endless labor, struggle, and suffering. Hesiod describes a time when trust had disappeared, and greed and deceit ruled the day. People were bound by self-interest, and the gods no longer interacted with mortals as they once had. Humanity was divided, struggling to survive in a world ruled by sorrow, where honor was replaced by betrayal. In this age, even family bonds were no longer sacred, and the sanctity of justice was lost. It was a time of moral blindness, where virtue had faded into memory, and evil had become the norm. The gods, observing from their immortal realm, could do little to prevent the downward spiral of humanity. The Iron Age was not just an age of physical toil, but of spiritual toil, an age where the very essence of humanity seemed destined to decay. Yet, in Hesiod's telling, there remains a hint of hope. Even in the Iron Age, humanity still has the potential for redemption. Though the gods have abandoned them, humans still possess the divine spark left by the gods. This inherent spark of goodness is something that remains in humanity, even in their worst moments, offering the possibility that the cycle of degeneration can someday be reversed, whether through repentance, wisdom, or the return of divine favor. The myth of the ages is also a reflection of humanity's constant struggle against its own nature, a struggle for growth, improvement, and restoration. Each of these ages, golden, silver, bronze, and iron, represents not just a passage of time, but a moral journey from virtue to corruption. The Golden Age symbolizes humanity's potential in its purest form, while the Iron Age represents the consequences of moral failure. Hesiod's narrative is a reminder of the fragility of human virtue and the necessity of balance. Humanity, in his view, is constantly in danger of losing its connection to the divine, and each generation has to confront the consequences of those who came before them. Hesiod's vision is ultimately a moral warning that humans must constantly strive to live in harmony with the divine, to maintain their virtues, and not fall into the temptation of selfishness, violence, or corruption. The decline of humanity through the ages serves as a reflection on the consequences of failing to live justly and righteously. Yet, even in the Iron Age, Hesiod's tale leaves room for hope, an eternal reminder that no matter how far humanity falls, the possibility for redemption always exists if one is willing to reach for it. In the pantheon of Greek mythology, few myths are as rich in meaning and as layered in symbolism as the story of the 5 ages of man. Hesiod's depiction of these ages offers a powerful commentary on the human condition, portraying humanity's rise from divine innocence to its eventual moral decay. The journey from the Golden Age under Cronus to the Iron Age is not merely a passage through time, but a spiritual evolution, reflecting the Greek view that life is a constant cycle of growth, loss, and struggle. The Golden Age under Cronus is the epitome of divine harmony, a time when humanity lived in a state of unspoiled peace and abundance. In this age, the gods ruled not as tyrants, but as benevolent figures who maintained order and justice in the world. Humanity was free from the scourge of labor, death, and discord, and the earth itself generously provided for all. Cronus, the ruler of the Golden Age, ensured that the laws of nature and the divine order were upheld without question. Mortals lived in unity with the gods, and the connection between the divine and human realms was intact. There was no division between the two. The gods freely mingled with mortals, offering their guidance and blessings without reservation, and humanity basked in the warmth of the gods' favor. In this age, humanity was innocent, untouched by the vices that would come to define later ages. They did not know strife or greed, and peace reigned over the land. This state of being symbolizes the ideal of what the Greek world viewed as true harmony, not through oppression or the use of power, but through the natural order maintained by the gods. It reflects a utopian existence where everything, from the smallest mortal life to the grand cosmic forces, functioned in perfect alignment. This age embodies the Greek vision of what life could be when humanity and the divine coexisted in perfect balance. The Golden Age represents a time of unblemished innocence, where humanity lived close to the gods and shared in their divine gifts without the burden of sin or guilt. It is, in many ways, a representation of idealistic human potential, a period where peace and abundance were natural outcomes of a harmonious world. However, like all golden things, this age was fragile, and the inevitable decay began to show its first signs. As time passed, humanity's inherent nature, a nature now characterized by self-interest and ambition, began to overshadow the pure connection they had once shared with the divine. And so, the Golden Age gave way to the Silver Age, which marked the first of the moral declines, where humans were no longer content with peace alone. The transition from the Golden Age to the Silver Age is the turning point in Hesiod's myth, a loss of innocence, but also the beginning of humanity's struggle to maintain their connection to the divine. As the Golden Age's peace faded into the Silver Age, the Bronze Age followed, bringing even greater disruption. Yet, it is the Iron Age that truly represents the moral decay and internal struggle that would come to define the Greek worldview of human history. By the time humanity reached the Iron Age, greed and deceit had become the driving forces of life, replacing the simplicity and unity of earlier ages. In the Iron Age, Hesiod sees humanity at its most decayed. The gods have withdrawn from the mortal world, leaving humans to fend for themselves in a realm that has become harsh, difficult, and barren. Without divine intervention, mortals must labor endlessly for their survival. The connection between the gods and mortals, once so intimate, is now strained, and humanity struggles not just against the external forces of nature, but against their own corrupted instincts. It is in the Iron Age that the true essence of human nature, its selfishness, envy, and greed, comes to the fore. What was once a harmonious existence has been replaced by discord, where justice is rarely practiced, and personal gain is prioritized over the common good. Yet, the Iron Age is not just a time of physical struggle, but a profound moral struggle. It is the age where the very concept of honor becomes twisted, where the human desire for power and pleasure outweighs the virtues that once defined the Golden Age. For the Greeks, this age represented the inevitable consequences of a world where humans lost their moral compass and allowed their vices to take hold. The transition from an age of peace to one of strife underscores the Greek idea that moral decay is an inevitable consequence of human nature when divine guidance is no longer present. While the Iron Age represents the ultimate downfall, it also underscores the Greeks' belief that struggle and hardship were part of the human experience. The struggle for survival, the fight to regain virtue and justice, is an ongoing theme throughout Greek mythology. The Iron Age, though marked by suffering and decay, reflects the human resilience to rise above it. The possibility of redemption, even in the darkest age, suggests that humanity's moral decline is not absolute and can be reversed if the will is strong enough. In the grand tapestry of Greek mythology, the hero represents the epitome of human potential, a figure imbued with divine favor and bestowed with the strength, wisdom, and courage to conquer the impossible. But these heroes, such as Heracles, Perseus, and Theseus, are more than just mere adventurers. They embody the ideal of what humanity can achieve, while also revealing the cost of greatness. Greek heroes are not simple paragons of virtue. Their stories are filled with complex moral dilemmas, sacrifices, and an endless struggle between their divine gifts and their human flaws. At the heart of Greek heroism is Heracles, a figure of almost mythical proportions, whose strength alone was enough to perform feats that would define the term heroic for millennia. Heracles' 12 labors were a test not just of strength, but of endurance and sacrifice. His tasks, facing the Nemean lion, capturing the Ceryneian hind, or retrieving the girdle of Hippolyta, are not just physical challenges, but tests of spirit. Yet, the deeper tragedy lies in the reason for these labors. Heracles was condemned to them due to his madness, a madness induced by Hera, the queen of the gods, who harbored an intense grudge against him due to his status as the son of Zeus and the mortal Alcmene. This divine vendetta shapes Heracles' life, and in many ways, it is his punishment that makes him a hero. Heracles' heroism is not just a result of his strength, but his willingness to endure unimaginable pain and guilt. His labors embody the Greek ideal that true heroism is often forged through suffering, not just victory. His strength is matched only by the sacrifice he is forced to make, and it is this endurance that elevates him to the status of a true hero. Perseus, on the other hand, represents a different kind of heroism, one that is driven by wisdom, strategy, and divine intervention. While Heracles' heroism is rooted in strength, Perseus' heroism is defined by his cleverness and resourcefulness. When tasked with slaying the Gorgon Medusa, Perseus faces not only the threat of Medusa's petrifying gaze, but the overwhelming challenge of retrieving the head of a creature whose very nature defies mortal comprehension. Yet, unlike Heracles, Perseus does not rely solely on his own strength. Instead, he is aided by the gods. He receives the winged sandals of Hermes, the shield of Athena, and the sword of Zeus. Perseus' heroism lies in how he uses divine tools in combination with his own courage and wit to outsmart his enemies. His victory over Medusa is symbolic not just of strength, but of the hero's ability to think and strategize under pressure. Perseus exemplifies the Greek ideal that wisdom is as integral to heroism as physical strength. In slaying Medusa, Perseus is not merely killing a monster. He is symbolizing the triumph of human intellect and divine aid over seemingly insurmountable odds. Then there is Theseus, the founder hero of Athens, who embodies the qualities of leadership, courage, and civic responsibility. Theseus's journey begins with his victory over the Minotaur in the labyrinth of Crete, but his heroism goes far beyond this single feat. Theseus is a hero defined by his commitment to the people. He does not fight for personal glory, but for the greater good of his city. When he ventures to Crete, it is not merely for a personal challenge, but to end the suffering of his people, who are forced to send their children to the Minotaur as a tribute. Theseus's heroism is grounded in his selflessness, his willingness to face danger not for fame or wealth, but to protect and lead his people. His success in slaying the Minotaur is a testament to his moral courage, and it reflects the Greek value that heroism is about duty to the polis and the community. Theseus's story is one of self-sacrifice and leadership, showcasing that true heroes are those who are willing to place the greater good above their own desires. What makes these heroes enduring figures in Greek mythology is not just their strength or wisdom, but their humanity. Each of these figures, while celebrated for their divine gifts, is also burdened by internal struggles. Heracles by the consequences of his own madness, Perseus by his reliance on the gods, and Theseus by the weight of his responsibility as a leader. They are not flawless paragons of virtue, but individuals who are tested by forces beyond their control, divine, natural, and moral. Their heroism lies not in their perfection, but in their ability to overcome the flaws and limitations that make them human. In Greek mythology, heroism is not about the absence of imperfection, but the willingness to act in the face of overwhelming odds, to sacrifice for the greater good, and to use one's gifts for a higher purpose. Heracles, Perseus, and Theseus all represent idealized versions of these qualities, but their stories remind us that heroism, in its truest form, is not about defeating monsters or achieving glory. It is about the journey of growth, sacrifice, and struggle that shapes the soul. Greek heroism is not simply about strength, prowess, or the ability to overcome challenges. It is about the moral, emotional, and psychological resolve to endure trials that test not only the body, but the soul. The heroes of Greek mythology, such as Heracles and Perseus, represent the pinnacle of human potential, each embodying the ideal qualities of strength, wisdom, and courage, but also demonstrating that true heroism is often tempered by sacrifice, flaws, and the consequences of their actions. These heroes are not flawless paragons, but figures who navigate the complexities of divine intervention, personal struggle, and moral dilemmas. Heracles, the son of Zeus and the mortal Alcmene, stands as the quintessential hero in Greek mythology, a man of immense strength, destined to perform extraordinary deeds that would forever define the concept of heroism. Yet, Heracles' journey is not simply about his muscular might. It is a psychological and emotional odyssey, one that tests his morality, emotional resilience, and resolve. The 12 labors, which Heracles must complete as a punishment for the crime of killing his family in a fit of madness, a curse cast upon him by Hera, are not just physical feats. They are also metaphors for the burdens of guilt and endurance. Each labor, from slaying the Nemean lion to capturing the Cerenaean hind, is a confrontation with impossibility, a challenge that forces Heracles to confront not just monsters, but the moral weight of his own actions. The first labor, where he defeats the Nemean lion, highlights Heracles' innate physical superiority. But the task is not won by strength alone. The lion's hide cannot be pierced, and it is through Heracles' cleverness that he eventually succeeds. In many ways, the Nemean lion symbolizes the internal battle that Heracles must fight, facing his flaws, outwitting his challenges, and enduring through trials that will weigh on his psyche long after the physical battle is over. As Heracles progresses through his labors, his emotional toll becomes evident. For instance, in the labor of the Erymanthian boar, Heracles must trap a creature that terrorizes the land, but the process of capturing the boar tests his patience as he has to chase it through the rugged terrain. There are no shortcuts in the labors, and each task represents not just the defeat of a creature, but the overcoming of internal barriers. By the time he confronts the Cretan bull or cleans the Augean stables, which was an incredibly humbling task, it is evident that Heracles' heroism is built not on brute strength alone, but on his ability to endure personal sacrifice and continue despite setbacks. But the most significant labor, the capture of Cerberus, the three-headed hound of the underworld, represents not just the triumph over a beast, but over mortality itself. Heracles must venture into the realm of death, and in doing so, he confronts the ultimate human fear: death, destruction, and the cost of heroism. The hero's journey is never easy. It demands sacrifice, suffering, and an unyielding resolve to achieve what seems unattainable. Heracles' labors may have been performed in the service of redemption, but each labor was also a personal reckoning, forcing the hero to confront his darkest emotions and deepest fears. In stark contrast to Heracles, Perseus represents a different type of heroism, one rooted in wisdom, strategy, and the courage to face the unknown. Perseus's journey begins with a divine prophecy that he would be the one to kill Medusa, a task assigned to him by King Polydectes as part of a larger plot to rid the kingdom of his unwanted attention. Perseus is a young man with no experience in battle, and yet he must embark on an impossible journey to slay a creature whose gaze can turn anyone to stone. However, Perseus' heroism is defined not only by bravery, but by his intelligence and resourcefulness. Unlike Heracles, whose physical power solves many of his problems, Perseus must rely on cunning and strategic thinking to succeed. In this sense, Perseus embodies a heroism that is not simply defined by the use of physical force, but by his ability to navigate complex situations. The gods, recognizing his potential, provide him with tools that allow him to triumph. Hermes' winged sandals, Athena's shield, and Hades' helmet of invisibility, each representing different aspects of the divine influence that shapes Perseus' journey. Perseus' use of the shield to view Medusa's reflection, rather than directly looking at her, is a moment that highlights wisdom over brute force, a key quality that makes him a truly Greek hero. Yet, Perseus is also a hero shaped by destiny. Despite his reliance on divine gifts, his victory over Medusa is not just a test of strength, but a fulfillment of the prophecy that governs his life. This makes his journey a reflection of the Greek idea that heroes are often bound by fate, but that they can still use their virtues, wisdom, bravery, and cunning, to overcome the constraints of destiny. The killing of Medusa is significant, not just because it marks the end of the Gorgon, but because it fulfills a prophecy, showing that Perseus, while aided by the gods, also has the power to define his path. Perseus is a reluctant hero, a young man who is thrust into circumstances beyond his control, but through his wisdom, bravery, and courage, and aided by divine gifts, he proves that heroism is not just about achieving glory, but about making difficult decisions in the face of overwhelming odds. His myth reinforces that heroism often requires the integration of divine favor with personal virtue, and that the greatest heroes are those who, even in the face of fate, retain their humanity and their capacity for courageous action. The judgment of Paris is a moment of profound moral complexity, where a seemingly innocent act, A young prince's decision about which goddess deserves the golden apple catalyzes a chain of events that will lead to death, betrayal, and war. What may appear to be a superficial beauty contest between three of the most powerful deities in Greek mythology is, in fact, the spark that ignites the Trojan War, one of the most enduring conflicts in mythological history. At the heart of this myth lies Paris, a Trojan prince whose life is shaped by forces beyond his control. Paris is often seen as a tragic figure, someone who is thrust into a situation that challenges both his desires and his duty to his people. When the three goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, present themselves as claimants for the golden apple, they appeal not only to his sense of judgment, but to his personal desires and ambitions. What Paris does not fully realize is that his decision will not only affect his own destiny, but that of his city and the world around him. The gods, each representing their own sphere of influence, offer him gifts that reflect their domains. Hera, as queen of the gods, promises Paris great political power, the control of Asia and empire. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategy, promises him victory in war and endless military glory. But Aphrodite, the goddess of love, promises the most tantalizing gift of all, the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Paris, swayed by desire and the promise of love, chooses Aphrodite, unwittingly setting into motion a series of events that will lead to the destruction of Troy and the death of many beloved heroes. His decision is made based on self-interest and pleasure, a personal desire to possess Helen, yet it is also a decision that reflects a fundamental flaw in Paris's character. He chooses beauty over wisdom, personal gain over greater good, and ultimately acts from a place of impulse rather than considering the larger consequences of his actions. The choice Paris makes is not just a matter of picking the most beautiful goddess. It is about status, power, and the divine influence that each goddess offers him. His choice, then, is a reflection of human flaws, the tendency to act on immediate desires without a full understanding of the long-term impact. This choice sets off a domino effect. Helen, already married to Menelaus, is taken from her husband and brought to Troy. The betrayal of Menelaus is not just a personal offense, but a blow to his honor as king, and he calls upon his fellow Greek rulers, including Agamemnon, Achilles, and Odysseus, to fulfill an oath made to Helen's father to protect her. What is crucial in understanding the significance of Paris's choice is how it reflects the Greek values of honor and duty. Paris, a prince of Troy, fails in his duty to his people, as his actions lead to the devastation of his city. His relationship with Helen, though driven by love, becomes a political catalyst for one of the most destructive wars in mythological history. Helen, in this context, is not merely a pawn in a romantic affair, but a symbol of power. Her abduction, or elopement, becomes a matter of honor for the Greeks, while Paris's decision reveals the fragility of human desires when placed in conflict with duty and honor. The divine involvement in the judgment of Paris cannot be understated. The gods manipulate and influence Paris in ways that highlight the Greek understanding of fate, that mortals are often caught in the tensions between free will and divine intervention. Paris's choice, although his own, is subtly guided by the god's influence over his desires. Zeus, the king of the gods, is also implicated in the myth, as he allows Paris to make the final decision, but ultimately knows the consequences of that choice will reverberate through history. The judgment of Paris is thus far more than a simple contest for beauty. It is a crucible of fate, where desire, moral flaws, and divine manipulation converge to create a tinderbox that sparks a war. It explores the fragility of human choice, especially when it is driven by desire rather than reason. Paris's decision reveals the tragic flaw that runs through many Greek myths: the inability to see beyond the immediate, the failure to understand the long-term consequences of personal actions, and the tension between free will and destiny. This moment of judgment is, in many ways, the ultimate test of human nature. How do we respond to the lure of immediate gratification when it conflicts with the greater good? Paris, in choosing Aphrodite, represents human vulnerability to temptation, but also the inevitable consequences of such choices. In this, the myth mirrors the Greek view of fate, that even the gods cannot escape the course of events set in motion by human actions. The Trojan War, one of the most legendary conflicts in ancient myth, was not simply a struggle between the city of Troy and the Greek states. It was a war driven by love, betrayal, and divine influence, involving complex heroes whose fates were forever shaped by their actions, desires, and relationships. The war's origins, especially the abduction of Helen, are both symbolic and literal in their reflection of Greek values such as honor, vengeance, and fate. Yet, the war was much more than a quarrel over a woman. It was a war that symbolized the intersection of human desire and divine intervention, and the heroes that emerge from this conflict reflect the Greek ideal of personal sacrifice, glory, and the inevitable consequences of war. The spark that ignited the Trojan War came from a seemingly small act: the judgment of Paris, a Trojan prince. Paris, having been chosen by the goddesses to determine who was the fairest, awarded the golden apple to Aphrodite, the goddess of love, who promised him the love of Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. This seemingly innocent decision set into motion the events that would lead to the greatest conflict in Greek mythology. Helen, wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta, was taken to Troy by Paris, either by force or willing consent, sparking the wrath of her husband and leading him to call upon the other Greek kings to fulfill an oath they had sworn to Helen's father, Tyndareus. This oath bound the kings to defend Helen's honor and retrieve her, no matter the cost. Helen's abduction is emblematic of the complexity of love and betrayal in Greek mythology. It was not just an act of passion or desire. It was a violation of sacred oaths, a breach of the laws of hospitality, and a moral and emotional betrayal that would bring the Greek world to war. Helen's role in the myth highlights the fragility of human desires and the destructive consequences of unbridled passion. In the eyes of the Greeks, Helen was not merely an object of beauty, but a symbol of how desire could unravel societies, spark wars, and break the sacred bonds of family and kingship. In a broader sense, the Trojan War reflects the Greek worldview that even the gods are not immune to the impulses of desire. Aphrodite, motivated by jealousy and the pursuit of her own desires, used Paris as a pawn in a much larger game of divine power. The gods' personal vendettas, particularly Hera's anger at Paris for slighting her, fuel the war's escalation, showcasing how divine jealousy and human emotions can intertwine to create cosmic conflict. Thus, the Trojan War was more than a quarrel over a woman. It was a struggle for honor, divine influence, and the power that comes with ruling in the world of men. It would eventually involve the greatest warriors of the Greek world, heroes whose fates were bound to the war, their actions echoing through history as a reflection of the tragic costs of human desire, vengeance, and divine manipulation. The Trojan War gave rise to some of the most famous and tragic heroes in Greek mythology, each with their unique qualities, motivations, and eventual fates. These heroes, Achilles, Hector, and Odysseus embody the full spectrum of the Greek heroic ideal, and each plays a critical role in the conflict that unfolds. Achilles, son of Peleus, and the sea nymph Thetis, was the greatest of the Greek warriors, unmatched in strength, speed, and ferocity. However, his greatness was marred by his flaw, his wrath. Achilles' anger, particularly toward Agamemnon for taking his prize, Briseis, led him to withdraw from the battle, throwing the Greeks into disarray. This decision, born from pride and a desire for personal honor, almost cost the Greeks the war. Achilles' actions reflect the Greek belief in fate, as he was caught between his desire for immortal glory and the inevitable knowledge that his death was foretold. Achilles' return to battle following the death of his close companion Patroclus marked his ultimate redemption, yet it also highlighted the tragic cost of his glory. His revenge against Hector, the Trojan prince, would cement his legacy, but also seal his doom. Achilles' story is a stark reminder that heroism in Greek mythology is often entwined with destruction and sacrifice, where the quest for personal glory often leads to tragic loss. In contrast to Achilles, Hector, the Trojan prince, embodied the Greek ideal of duty and self-sacrifice. Hector was not driven by the desire for personal glory, but by a deep sense of responsibility to his family and his people. As the leader of the Trojan army, he was the moral center of the Trojans, fighting not for revenge, but for the defense of his city and the protection of his family. His courage and honor stand in stark contrast to the more self-centered motivations of Achilles. Hector's ultimate tragic death at the hands of Achilles, after he is lured into battle, symbolizes the Greek belief that duty to family and city often comes at the expense of the individual. Hector's legacy, though overshadowed by Achilles' rage, stands as a model of selflessness and moral integrity. His sacrifice highlights the moral themes of the Trojan War, where honor and loyalty are central to a hero's identity, even if it means death on the battlefield. While Achilles and Hector were warriors of unmatched physical prowess, Odysseus was a hero of a different sort. Known for his cleverness, wit, and strategic thinking, Odysseus played a pivotal role in the Greek victory through his intelligence rather than sheer physical might. He is best known for devising the Trojan horse strategy, which ultimately allowed the Greeks to infiltrate the walls of Troy and secure their victory. Odysseus's heroism lies not in his ability to fight, but in his ability to think and outwit his enemies. His journey, which is immortalized in the Odyssey, also reflects the Greek idea that wisdom is as valuable as strength. Odysseus's story is one of cunning and endurance, as he faces numerous trials and obstacles on his journey home, making him one of the most complex and compelling heroes of Greek mythology. In the Trojan War, gods were not mere spectators, but active participants, their whims, desires, and personal vendettas shaping the outcome of the conflict. Unlike other mythologies where gods are distant and abstract, in Greek mythology, the gods are deeply entwined in human affairs, manipulating, guiding, and sometimes sabotaging mortals to achieve their own ends. The divine interventions during the Trojan War are not only significant for the heroes they directly impact, but also reveal a great deal about the nature of the gods themselves, their attitudes toward mortals, and the fine line between divine favor and divine wrath. The gods' involvement in the Trojan War is marked by a blend of personal rivalries, favoritism, and emotional manipulation, reflecting the complex nature of divine power in Greek thought. Each god aligns with one side or the other, often based on personal grievances, alliances, and desires. These divine biases shape the war's narrative, influencing the fate of mortals who, though mighty in their own right, are often mere pawns in the gods' eternal games. At the root of the war's divine nature is the judgment of Paris, which set the stage for the gods' intervention. Paris, the Trojan prince, was asked to decide which goddess was the fairest, and his choice of Aphrodite over Hera and Athena ignited a divine conflict. For Hera and Athena, the decision was a personal affront that would color their involvement in the war. Hera, as the queen of the gods, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare, had been slighted, and their anger at Paris would fuel their intense hatred of Troy. Their interventions in the war were driven by pride and a desire for vengeance, rather than any true allegiance to the Greeks. In contrast, Aphrodite, driven by the need to fulfill her promise to Paris, becomes the primary divine supporter of Troy. Her passion for Paris and the favor she grants him serve as a reminder of the power of desire, not just in mortals, but in the gods themselves. Aphrodite's role in the Trojan War demonstrates that the gods are driven by personal emotions, and that these emotions shape the fate of the world. Her divine involvement is not only about protecting Paris, but also about fulfilling her promise, demonstrating the unpredictability of divine influence. Zeus, the king of the gods, holds a unique position in the war. He is often portrayed as the arbitrator between the two sides, trying to maintain a delicate balance between the Greeks and Trojans. His role is particularly complex, as he both facilitates and resists the desires of other gods. While he tries to remain neutral, his decisions are frequently swayed by the gods' personal vendettas. In one instance, he allows the Trojans to gain an upper hand, only to have his actions undermined by his wife, Hera, and the goddess Athena, both of whom interfere in his attempts to mediate. This dynamic shows how even Zeus, the supreme ruler of the gods, is not immune to divine politics and the complex web of jealousies that govern the gods' actions. The most direct effects of divine intervention are seen in the lives of the war's heroes. Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors, is perhaps the most emblematic of the divine-human relationship in the war. Thetis, his mother, is a sea nymph who pleads with Zeus to ensure her son's glory in battle. Achilles' fury is directed not only at the Trojans, but also at Agamemnon, the Greek leader, whose actions set Achilles on a path of vengeance. However, Achilles' fate is ultimately in the hands of the gods. He is granted near invincibility by Thetis, but Apollo, another god involved in the war, plays a critical role in ensuring his downfall. His immortality, promised by his mother, cannot prevent his tragic end. Achilles' heel, the one vulnerable spot on his body, becomes his downfall, an act engineered by Apollo. Here, divine intervention is seen as both a blessing and a curse, highlighting the fate-driven nature of Greek mythology, where even the greatest heroes are bound by the gods' whims. Hector, the Trojan prince, is also deeply affected by divine involvement, though in a more noble and tragic sense. As the defender of Troy, Hector receives the favor of Apollo, who ensures that he is victorious in battle for a time. Apollo's protection allows Hector to continue his role as the hope of Troy, but Hector's eventual death at the hands of Achilles is a reminder that divine support is fleeting. Zeus intervenes at the end of the battle, ensuring that Hector's honor is preserved by preventing the Greeks from desecrating his body, but the gods do not prevent his death. Hector's story demonstrates that while divine intervention can grant temporary protection, it does not guarantee victory. His sacrifice highlights the tragic nature of heroism. No mortal, no matter how noble, can escape the inevitable. Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, plays a different role in the war, relying on wit and cunning rather than sheer strength. While Achilles and Hector represent the traditional ideals of the warrior hero, Odysseus embodies the idea of intelligent heroism. His greatest contribution to the war is the Trojan horse, a strategy that ultimately brings about the fall of Troy. Odysseus's divine support comes from Athena, the goddess of wisdom, who aids him in devising the plan and supports him throughout the war. Odysseus's involvement in the Trojan War, in contrast to the other heroes, demonstrates the power of cleverness over brute force, and his reliance on Athena's guidance underscores the importance of divine favor for success. The gods' influence on the Trojan War reveals much about their complex attitudes toward mortals. On one hand, they manipulate and guide mortals as chess pieces, using them to fulfill their own desires, whether for revenge, honor, or glory. On the other hand, the gods' intervention is also a reflection of the Greek understanding of fate, that even the greatest heroes are bound by divine will. The gods are not omnipotent in the sense of controlling every aspect of mortal life, but their interventions underscore the fragility of human existence. That, ultimately, the gods control the destinies of mortals, whether through blessings or curses. This interventionist role shows that in the Greek worldview, mortals and gods are not separate entities. Rather, they exist in a symbiotic relationship where mortal actions are always influenced by divine intervention, and the gods themselves are never immune to human desires and emotions. The gods' roles in the Trojan War are emblematic of how Greek mythology reflects human nature, complex, fraught with ambition, and constantly torn between passion and duty. The Trojan War, one of the most significant and tragic conflicts in Greek mythology, is not merely a war between mortals, but a battle of ideals, driven by complex emotions, divine manipulations, and deeply ingrained cultural values. At the heart of this war are two of its most pivotal figures, Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors, and Hector, the noble Trojan prince. Their respective fates, shaped by honor, pride, and the gods' will, serve as profound reflections of the tragic nature of heroism in Greek mythology. Achilles, son of Peleus and Thetis, is defined by his unmatched strength and rage, two forces that propel him to heroic glory, but also threaten to destroy him. Achilles is a warrior bound by his sense of honor, and when Agamemnon, leader of the Greek forces, seizes his war prize, Briseis, Achilles is consumed by pride. The insult is not merely to his personal possession, but to his identity as the greatest warrior among the Greeks. Honor, in Achilles' eyes, is everything. His decision to withdraw from battle, leaving his comrades vulnerable to Trojan attack, is a self-imposed exile not just from the physical battlefield, but from the very ideals that define him as a hero. The internal conflict Achilles faces is emblematic of the Greek hero's tragic flaw. His pride is both his greatest strength and his undoing. He values his personal glory above all, and this makes him uncompromising, even in the face of larger forces at work. His withdrawal is not an act of cowardice, but an emotional decision, driven by his wounded ego and a desire to maintain his autonomy and dignity in the eyes of the Greek army. But the war, as Achilles soon learns, is not just about personal pride. It is a collective effort, and his absence allows the Trojans to gain ground, leading to the death of Patroclus, his closest friend. The loss of Patroclus and the realization that his pride has directly contributed to his friend's death becomes the turning point for Achilles. It is here that his internal conflict reaches its peak. His return to battle is no longer about the honor of the individual, but about the sacrifice of the self, a reluctant acceptance that his personal glory must be put aside in favor of vengeance. The death of Hector, whom he kills in revenge for Patroclus, is both a triumph of rage and a personal catharsis, but it leaves Achilles facing an emotional vacuum, a hero who has fulfilled his destiny, but who is now left to contend with the emotional and moral costs of his actions. Hector, the Prince of Troy and its greatest defender, stands in direct contrast to Achilles, where Achilles is consumed by individual glory and the pursuit of immortality. Hector is driven by a profound sense of duty to his family, city, and people. He fights not for personal gain, but to protect Troy from destruction. His honor is tied to his role as a protector of his people, and he is willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good. Hector's death, however, marks the end of Trojan hope. When he faces Achilles in single combat, Hector's desire to defend his city and family is pitted against the wrath of a spurned hero, whose rage has been burning for years. Hector's plea for mercy, asking that his body be returned to his family for proper burial rites, showcases the moral dignity he holds in contrast to Achilles' blind vengeance. His death is not just a physical loss, it is a symbolic defeat of the values he represents: honor, sacrifice, and duty. For the Trojans, Hector's death is catastrophic. He is their moral center, the leader who fights not for himself, but for the future of his people. His fall shifts the tide of the war, and the Trojans are left in a state of mourning and despair, their greatest warrior slain. For the Greeks, Hector's death represents a tragic victory. Achilles' revenge is satisfied, but at the cost of a man who fought not for glory, but for duty. The Greeks, although victorious, are left to reckon with the moral implications of their triumph. Achilles' vengeance leaves them without a true sense of honor, as the gods themselves, witnessing the inhumane treatment of Hector's body, turn their gaze away from the Greek cause. Hector's death also serves as a tragic turning point for Achilles himself. His rage, which had been unfettered and indiscriminate, now leaves him with a sense of emptiness. The death of his greatest adversary does not bring the peace Achilles had hoped for. Instead, it leaves him haunted by the cost of his actions, as the cycle of vengeance continues and his own fate inches closer. The gods play a pivotal role in both Hector's and Achilles' fates, as they have in the entire Trojan War. Zeus, Hera, and Apollo influence their decisions, guiding or hindering them at crucial moments. Achilles' fate is shaped by divine will, as the gods manipulate his emotions and actions. Athena's intervention helps Achilles gain victory, but the gods cannot save him from the tragic consequences of his rage. Similarly, Hector's divine protection by Apollo allows him to fight valiantly, but it is ultimately his humanity, his family, duty, and honor that defines his tragic end. Both heroes, though monumental in their actions, ultimately reflect the tragic nature of war and heroism in Greek mythology. Their internal conflicts, moral struggles, and divine manipulations serve as a reflection of the cost of pride, the futility of vengeance, and the inevitable consequences of war. Achilles and Hector, in their rage and sacrifice, embody the Greek ideal that heroes are not infallible beings. They are products of their flaws, their pride, and their decisions. The Trojan horse remains one of the most iconic moments in Greek mythology, a testament not just to the military ingenuity of the Greeks, but to their intellectual prowess and strategic cunning. It encapsulates the Greek belief that victory does not always lie in sheer force, but in the ability to outthink and outmaneuver the enemy. In the myth of the Trojan War, the Greeks, after 10 years of fruitless siege and growing desperation, would finally win through a deceptive act of unparalleled brilliance that would both seal their triumph and symbolize their intellectual superiority. At the heart of this plan was Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, and one of the greatest strategists in Greek mythology. Unlike Achilles, whose strength and rage had defined much of the conflict, or Hector, whose courage and honor marked his every action, Odysseus represented the Greek ideal of cunning, the hero whose greatest weapon was his mind. As the Greeks found themselves facing an enemy whose walls they could not breach and whose defense had proven impenetrable, Odysseus, ever resourceful, proposed a solution that would strike not at the fortifications of Troy, but at the very psychology of its defenders. The strategy itself was deceptively simple, yet profoundly effective. The Greeks constructed a massive wooden horse, hollowed out to conceal a small group of elite soldiers. After feigning defeat, the Greek forces sailed away, leaving behind this monumental gift, claiming it was an offering to the gods, designed to secure a safe journey home. The Trojans, exhausted by the long siege and eager for respite, believed the war was finally over and brought the horse inside their walls as a symbol of their triumph. The Trojans, in their pride, mistook the horse for a gift of peace, symbolizing their victory and the Greeks' retreat. But the horse was, of course, no gift. It was the vehicle of Troy's doom. As night fell, the Greeks hidden inside the horse emerged, opening the city gates to allow the rest of the Greek army, who had secretly returned under the cover of darkness, to enter the city. The Greeks poured into the heart of Troy, catching the Trojans off guard and plunging the city into a bloodbath. The fall of Troy was swift and brutal, its defenders unprepared for the treachery that had unfolded before them. The Trojan horse encapsulates two key Greek values that were central to their heroic ideal: cunning and resourcefulness. For the Greeks, bravery in battle was important, but the ability to think strategically, to outwit and outlast the enemy, was just as revered. Heroes like Odysseus were celebrated for their ability to manipulate circumstances and deceive enemies, using their minds to achieve what physical force could not. This intellectual approach to war is seen in the Greeks' use of deception, not as a dishonorable tactic, but as an accepted part of military strategy. The Trojan horse was not simply about breaking down the walls of Troy. It was about breaking down the enemy's defenses using psychological warfare. The concept of resourcefulness is embedded in the myth as well. The Greeks had no more soldiers, no more strength, and no more time to sustain the siege. They had to use what they had, and what they had was their ingenuity. The Trojan horse is a perfect representation of this ability to adapt to circumstances and turn the enemy's strength into their weakness. The Greeks, with their dwindling resources, turned to their most valuable weapon, their intellect. While the Greeks may have seen the Trojan horse as a brilliant victory of strategy, the Trojans paid the price for their pride and hubris, their celebration of the Greek departure, their overconfidence in their victory, and their failure to question the strange offering led to their downfall. The gates of Troy, once seen as the invincible barriers against invasion, were opened by the very belief that victory was theirs. The Trojan horse is a symbol of the consequences of complacency, how pride and a false sense of security can lead to catastrophic failure. The psychological impact on the Trojans was immense. Not only did they suffer devastation and destruction, but their pride, which had long been the cornerstone of their defense, was shattered. The Greeks' success in this deceptive strategy forced the Trojans to confront their own overconfidence and the tragic irony of their downfall, brought about by their own hubris, is one of the war's most poignant lessons. The Trojan horse's legacy extends beyond the fall of Troy. It has become the archetype of deception in warfare and the symbol of strategic genius. In modern times, the phrase Trojan horse is synonymous with any subversive tactic that infiltrates an organization or society from within. The Greeks' ability to use deception as a weapon continues to be studied and admired as a brilliant military maneuver. In the context of Greek mythology, it serves as a reminder that victory is not always achieved through sheer force. It is often won by those who can see beyond the battlefield, using their minds to outthink and outmaneuver their enemies. The destruction of Troy is not just the conclusion of a long siege, it represents the inevitable downfall of great civilizations, a recurring theme in Greek mythology. In a world where gods and mortals alike are bound by fate and hubris, even the mightiest cities cannot escape the cycle of rise and fall. The fall of Troy, though a triumph for the Greeks, is a tragedy not only for the Trojans but also for the victors, whose own futures are sealed in the ashes of Troy. The city's destruction is a warning against pride and the belief that greatness is eternal, a lesson that echoes throughout the entire mythological narrative. The war had raged for 10 long years, and the Greeks, weary and frustrated, had failed to breach the walls of Troy. But in the end, it wasn't through the force of arms that they succeeded. It was through cunning. The Greeks, led by Odysseus, used the Trojan horse to infiltrate the city, turning the Trojans' own hubris against them. They believed the war was over, and the horse was a gift, a symbol of Greek retreat. The Trojans, ever confident in their impenetrable walls and the apparent end of the conflict, brought the horse inside, sealing their doom. As the Greeks emerged from the horse, the gates of Troy were opened, and the city fell in a night of carnage and destruction. The Trojans, once the pride of the eastern Mediterranean, were reduced to rubble, their homes, their treasures, their very legacy obliterated by the Greeks' vengeance and deception. The gods, though they had played their part in the war, were largely silent in the face of Troy's destruction. Zeus, the king of the gods, had watched as the city fell into the hands of those he had once protected, and the city's fall was not just a loss for Troy, it was a reminder of the fragility of human civilization in the face of divine will. In Greek mythology, the fall of great cities like Troy is a constant reminder of the impermanence of all things. Despite Troy's legendary strength and prestige, it is ultimately undone by its own hubris, the belief that its walls and mighty warriors were invincible. The gods, despite their alliances and interventions, are ultimately dispassionate observers, reflecting the Greek worldview that no civilization, no matter how powerful, can withstand the forces of fate and divine retribution. The aftermath of the Trojan War brought not just physical devastation, but a psychological reckoning for its heroes. For the Greeks, victory was bittersweet. The war had cost them much, and now the survivors had to face the consequences of their actions, both in the immediate aftermath and in the long term. Odysseus, the brilliant tactician behind the Trojan horse, would be forever marked by the war's aftermath. The Iliad may have ended with the fall of Troy, but Odysseus's journey had only just begun. He would spend 10 more years trying to return home to Ithaca, a journey that would test not just his courage, but his character. His intelligence, his ability to navigate the most difficult situations, and his moral ambiguity would be central themes in his journey. The Odyssey shows that warfare, even in victory, leaves a lasting scar on the soul, and Odysseus would have to contend with the weight of his actions, the killing of Trojan leaders, the breaking of oaths, and the toll that the war took on his family and kingdom. For Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, the war brought a different fate. Neoptolemus, though young and filled with vitality, was marked by a drive to live up to his father's legendary status. But unlike Achilles, who was driven by pride and rage, Neoptolemus lacked the wisdom to temper his desires. His brutal acts, such as the slaughter of Priam, reveal a side of heroism that is deeply connected to revenge and bloodshed. While Achilles was a tragic hero who sought to be remembered, Neoptolemus was a tool of vengeance, a hero not so much defined by his deeds, but by his unthinking adherence to the legacy of his father. Aeneas, the Trojan prince, represents the other side of the coin. Surviving the war, he becomes a symbol of duty and hope. After the fall of Troy, Aeneas escapes the burning city, carrying his father and family as he flees. His story marks the foundation of a new era, the birth of the Roman Empire, which he will eventually establish as the founder of Rome. His journey is not one of vengeance, but of survival and reconstruction, reflecting the Trojans' resilience and their belief that even in destruction, there is the possibility of rebirth. For the Trojans, the aftermath was equally devastating, though not just in terms of physical loss. Their city was razed, their people either killed or enslaved, and their leaders defeated. Hector, the greatest Trojan hero, had already fallen, and with his death, the spirit of Troy was extinguished. The Trojans had fought valiantly, but in the end, they were undone not just by Greek force, but by the pride that kept them from recognizing the divine will at work. The gods' interventions, from Aphrodite's love for Paris to Zeus' unpredictable judgment, reflect the fragility of human control over fate. The fate of the Trojans is marked by tragedy and loss, but it also marks the end of a civilization that had been a force to be reckoned with, making way for the rise of Rome. The rise of the Greek polis marks a monumental shift in the political, social, and cultural landscape of the ancient Greek world. These city-states, which blossomed during the Archaic period, c. 800 to 500 BCE, became the crucible for the development of Greek identity, shaped by individualism, civic participation, and a deep connection to both the gods and the land. Unlike the monarchies that preceded them, where power was concentrated in the hands of a single ruler or small elite, the polis was a space of shared governance and community responsibility, an environment that allowed Greek society to flourish in ways that emphasized both the individual's role and the collective good. The polis was not merely a physical entity, it was a cultural and intellectual center where the ideals of freedom, democracy, and civic duty took root. Each polis, whether it was Athens, Sparta, or Corinth, created its own unique identity, drawing upon its geography, resources, and history. These city-states were not isolated. Though fiercely independent, they shared a common language, religion, and sense of cultural heritage that connected them to each other. The citizenship within the polis was one of the most radical innovations of the time, a system in which individuals could engage in direct decision-making through assemblies and public discourse. This sense of ownership in the fate of the city was, in many ways, the foundation for the later democratic innovations of Athens. The rise of the polis reflects the Greek emphasis on the role of the individual in shaping society. The Greeks saw themselves not as subjects of a distant monarch, but as active participants in their city-state's political and religious life. In fact, the city-state provided a fertile ground for the birth of philosophy, as thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle could explore the nature of justice, ethics, and the ideal state within the context of a community that allowed for public debate and the exchange of ideas. This intellectual engagement with reason and rhetoric became a cornerstone of Athenian identity, leading to profound developments in the arts, politics, and thought that would echo through Western history. The formation of the polis also encouraged the development of self-sufficiency. Each city-state was designed to foster a deep sense of local identity, and its citizens' obligations to the state were paramount. From the military discipline of Sparta to the political engagement of Athens, Each polis served as a microcosm for the broader Greek world. These city-states were both independent and interconnected, each contributing to the overall Greek identity, while also maintaining a fiercely competitive spirit. The wars between the city-states, such as the Peloponnesian War, reflected the tensions between the desire for individualism and the need for unity in the face of common enemies. In Athens, two spaces, the Acropolis and the Agora, stood as the physical and symbolic heart of the city. These areas were not simply geographic locations, but the very nucleus of Athenian political, religious, and social life. Each space had its own role in shaping the Athenian worldview, and together they formed the foundation upon which Athenian identity was built. The Acropolis, towering over the city, was the center of Athenian religious life and the symbol of the city's divine protection. The Acropolis housed the Parthenon, a magnificent temple dedicated to Athena, the city's patron goddess. The Parthenon, with its iconic columns and sculptures, was not just an architectural marvel, but a reflection of Athens' pride, faith, and sense of divine favor. It was a place where Athenians gathered for major religious festivals, and where the state's identity was reinforced through rituals and sacrifices that paid homage to their gods. The Acropolis was also a site of political legitimacy, a place where the gods were believed to ensure the success of the city-state, making it as much a political symbol as a religious one. Just below the Acropolis was the Agora, the bustling heart of Athenian civic life. The Agora was a place of public discourse and the exchange of ideas, where citizens gathered not just for trade, but to debate, discuss, and make decisions that would shape the future of the city-state. It was here that the Athenian assembly met, where citizens could speak freely, propose laws, and vote on the matters of the day. The Agora embodied the ideals of Athenian democracy. It was the place where citizens, though limited to free men, could participate directly in the governance of their city. The Agora was also a social space where individuals could meet, exchange news, and discuss ideas, fostering the sense of community that was vital to Athenian life. While the Acropolis symbolized Athenian glory and divine favor, the Agora was the place where democracy was put into practice. It was a space where public trials took place, where public debates could shape the future of the city, and where new ideas could take root and grow. It was here that the very concept of citizenship, that active, participatory role in the city's governance, was lived out daily. The Agora, with its bustling markets, temples, and public buildings, was the center of Athenian social life, where people of all classes could interact, engage in politics, and strengthen the fabric of Athenian society. Together, the Acropolis and the Agora reflected two key aspects of Athenian identity: the divine and the human, the sacred and the political. The Acropolis, with its divine protection, reinforced the Athenians' belief that their city was under the special favor of the gods, while the Agora gave them a space to practice democracy and engagement, reinforcing the belief that power lay in the hands of the citizens. These two spaces embodied the essence of what it meant to be Athenian, devoted to the gods, yet deeply involved in the political and social life of the city. The story of Solon and his reforms is a tale of a statesman who navigated the turbulent waters of political strife and social unrest to lay the foundations for Athenian democracy, a system that would go on to influence the course of Western civilization. In the early 6th century BCE, Athens was a city in crisis. The noble families controlled most of the land and wealth, while the common people, particularly the farmers, were burdened by insurmountable debt. Many were forced into debt slavery, and the growing disparity between the rich and the poor was threatening to tear the city apart. In this context of instability and division, Solon was chosen as the Archon in 594 BCE, tasked with finding a solution to the city's problems. Solon's first and perhaps most radical act was his seisachtheia, which means shaking off the burdens. This series of reforms was aimed at addressing the most immediate causes of social unrest in Athens: debt and the practice of debt slavery. Solon's economic reforms sought to alleviate the suffering of the poor, while also ensuring the stability of Athenian society. The seisachtheia forgave debts and freed those who had been enslaved due to their inability to pay. Solon's actions immediately relieved the most pressing problems facing the city, but they also set a precedent for social justice. By abolishing debt bondage, Solon effectively dismantled one of the most oppressive aspects of the Athenian social system, where the poor were often bound by debt and exploited by the aristocracy. This created a more equitable society, where free citizens were not beholden to the whims of the wealthy landowners. Furthermore, Solon implemented land reforms that limited the amount of land any one individual could hold. This prevented the accumulation of excessive wealth in the hands of a few families, reducing the power of the aristocracy and redistributing resources in a way that benefited the broader citizenry. Solon's efforts were not just about economic redistribution. They were designed to create a more equitable foundation for Athenian society, where people had a stake in their community and its future. While Solon's economic reforms addressed immediate inequality, his political reforms were perhaps the most significant in terms of laying the groundwork for Athenian democracy. In a time when political power was concentrated in the hands of a few aristocratic families, Solon sought to broaden the base of political participation. Solon reorganized Athenian society into 4 classes, based primarily on wealth rather than birth. This was a crucial shift, as it allowed for greater political mobility and gave more citizens a voice in the governance of Athens. However, Solon's democracy was not an immediate democracy in the modern sense. It was still quite limited by today's standards. The poorest citizens, known as thetes, were still excluded from many aspects of the political system. Yet, Solon's reforms paved the way for later, more expansive democratic practices by establishing the principle that political participation should be broader than merely the aristocracy. One of Solon's most important contributions was his establishment of the Council of 400, which included citizens from various classes, not just the wealthy elites. This council was responsible for proposing laws, making it a key body in the early stages of Athenian democracy. Solon also granted citizens the right to appeal to the courts, which ensured that justice was not merely the privilege of the aristocracy, but something that could be accessed by any citizen. Solon's contribution to the legal system of Athens was groundbreaking. He is credited with creating the first written code of laws, which were publicly displayed and accessible to all citizens. This was an essential step in the transition from arbitrary rule to a systematic system of justice. Before Solon, laws were often unwritten and subject to the whims of those in power. Solon's codification of laws created a more structured and transparent legal system, where the rules were clear and all citizens were bound by the same set of laws. More importantly, Solon's legal reforms promoted the idea of equality before the law. No longer could the aristocracy bend the rules in their favor. Everyone, regardless of their social class, was subject to the same laws. This was a radical shift in Athenian society, marking the beginning of the concept of justice as an impartial force, rather than something that favored the elite. The legal equality Solon introduced would become a key feature of Athenian democracy and would later influence the development of Western legal systems. Though Solon did not create a full democracy in Athens during his lifetime, his reforms were the foundation for what was to come. His establishment of a more equitable society, the creation of a more participatory government, and the introduction of legal equality set the stage for the democratic practices that would define Athens in the 5th century BCE. Solon's reforms, by opening the door to broader participation in political and social life, allowed Athens to become a more inclusive city-state, where the citizens would gradually assume more power over the decisions that affected their lives. It was his system of civic responsibility, coupled with the legal reforms he instituted, that would eventually give rise to the Athenian democracy, a system in which ordinary citizens could vote, serve in government, and shape their own future. Solon's vision for Athens was one of balance, a society in which wealth and power were not concentrated in the hands of a few, but shared more equally among its citizens. This vision would be tested and refined over time, particularly with the democratic reforms of Cleisthenes and the leadership of Pericles. But it was Solon's foundations that made it possible. The rise of Athenian democracy was neither sudden nor unchallenged. It was the result of decades of reform, beginning with Solon in the early 6th century BCE and culminating in the transformative policies of Cleisthenes and the visionary leadership of Pericles. These individuals, though separated by time, would together shape the course of Athens, and their contributions would leave an indelible mark on history, not only in terms of political thought, but also cultural achievement. By the time Cleisthenes came to power in 508 BCE, Athens had experienced waves of political instability. The city-state was suffering from the aftermath of tyrannical rule under Pisistratus and his sons, which had sowed discord between the aristocracy and the common people. While Solon had laid the groundwork by addressing the city's economic inequalities, Athens was still deeply divided along class lines, and the old aristocratic families continued to hold power, preventing broader political participation. Cleisthenes, responding to both the demands of the people and the necessity for lasting political stability, sought to restructure Athenian society in a way that would redistribute power and ensure that no one group could dominate. His reforms are often seen as the foundation of Athenian democracy, though they did not create a fully inclusive system overnight. One of Cleisthenes' most revolutionary changes was his reorganization of the Athenian political structure. He introduced the system of dems, local neighborhoods or villages that replaced the old tribal system based on family lineage. By doing so, Cleisthenes diluted the influence of the old aristocratic families who had controlled the traditional 4 tribes, replacing them with a more balanced, geographically based system. This new structure made it far harder for any one faction to dominate the political process. Cleisthenes also created the Council of 500, a body in which citizens were randomly selected by lot from the 10 tribes. This ensured that ordinary citizens, rather than only the wealthy elite, had a voice in the day-to-day governance of the city. The Council of 500 was responsible for setting the agenda for the Ecclesia, the Athenian assembly, where all male citizens could participate in voting on laws and policy decisions. By making participation in government a right of citizenship rather than a privilege reserved for the aristocracy, Cleisthenes set the stage for the more inclusive democracy that would later flourish in Athens. While these reforms were far from perfect, they provided the foundation for the Athenian system of governance. They allowed for greater participation in political life and lessened the influence of the aristocracy, making Athens a city where more citizens could have a say in the decisions that shaped their future. Cleisthenes' vision would be expanded upon in the years to come, but his reforms were the cornerstone of Athens' democratic evolution. Pericles, the son of Xanthippus, rose to prominence during Athens' Golden Age, a time when the city-state reached the height of its power, influence, and cultural achievement. Elected strategos, general. For over 30 years, Pericles was instrumental in shaping the trajectory of Athens, both politically and culturally. Under his leadership, Athens became the leading power in the Aegean and the hub of Greek intellectual, artistic, and political life. Pericles' political reforms further expanded upon the foundations laid by Cleisthenes. He is best known for promoting a radical form of democracy, one that extended the rights of citizens to participate in public office, even if they were poor. By introducing the practice of paying citizens for serving on juries or holding public office, Pericles made it possible for even the poorest citizens to engage in the political life of Athens, ensuring that democracy was truly a system for all citizens, not just the wealthy elite. Beyond his political innovations, Pericles recognized the importance of cultural prestige in asserting Athens' dominance. He spearheaded the construction of the Parthenon, the grand temple to Athena, whose stunning architecture and sculptural decorations symbolized the peak of Athenian artistic achievement. Under Pericles' patronage, Athens also saw the flowering of Greek drama, with playwrights such as Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus creating timeless works of theatre that explored the complexities of human nature, morality, and society. These plays were performed in large open-air theatres, often as part of religious festivals, and they became a central part of Athenian civic and cultural life. In the realm of philosophy, Pericles presided over a period of intellectual expansion. Socrates, one of the most influential philosophers of all time, began to engage with the public, questioning conventional ideas about ethics, politics, and knowledge. Pericles' Athens was a place where intellectual freedom was valued, and the pursuit of truth was central to its ethos. Yet, Pericles' reign was not without its challenges. The Peloponnesian War against Sparta and its allies, a conflict that would ravage Athens for decades, began shortly after Pericles' most powerful period. Still, his leadership during the early years of the war was characterized by strategic brilliance, as he used Athens' superior naval fleet to avoid direct conflict with Sparta's superior army, instead securing Athens' position as the preeminent naval power in the Greek world. Pericles' legacy cannot be measured solely in political terms. His vision for Athens was that of a city of learning, arts, and democracy, a vision that inspired generations of Athenians and left a lasting imprint on the culture of the Western world. Under his leadership, Athens not only became the most powerful city-state in Greece, but also the intellectual and cultural capital of the ancient world. His era defined classical Athens as a beacon of artistic, political, and intellectual achievement, and his influence is still felt in the philosophy, government, and arts of the Western world. In the harsh and unforgiving landscape of ancient Sparta, the strength of the city-state was not only built upon military prowess, but also upon a strict and unyielding system of education and social control that produced some of the most feared warriors in history. At the heart of this system was the agoge, an educational and training program so demanding that it shaped every aspect of a Spartan's life, creating a society where the soldier was the ultimate citizen. From the moment Spartan boys reached the age of 7, they entered the agoge, an educational system designed to forge warriors, not just men. Unlike other Greek city-states, where education focused on the intellectual, Spartan education focused exclusively on creating individuals who were physically resilient, disciplined, and loyal to the state. The agoge was not merely a school, it was a system of indoctrination into a life of military service, where the boy's loyalty to the Spartan state became his most fundamental duty. Life in the agoge was brutally austere. Boys were taken from their homes and placed into communal barracks, where they learned to rely on each other for survival. From the outset, their individuality was suppressed in favor of group cohesion. They were taught to endure hunger, cold, and fatigue, often barely clothed, and always under the watchful eye of their superiors. This harsh treatment wasn't just a test of their physical limits, but was designed to forge mental toughness and obedience, as the boys were often forced to endure long periods of hunger and deprivation, learning how to steal food to survive. However, if they were caught stealing, they were punished, not for the theft itself, but for not doing it cleverly enough, teaching them that bravery without strategy was useless. Training in physical fitness, from wrestling to running, and the use of weapons were fundamental components of the agoge. Boys were taught to fight, not just with strength, but with agility, intelligence, and strategy. They were not only trained in battle, but also in survival, learning to move quickly, silently, and efficiently, and, most importantly, to serve the state above all else. Disobedience was met with harsh punishment, and failure was seen as a betrayal of Sparta itself. As the boys grew older, they were tested in real-life military situations, participating in raids and skirmishes that tested their endurance, loyalty, and ability to survive under extreme pressure. The ultimate goal was to produce warriors who were fearless in battle, fiercely loyal to each other and the Spartan state, and capable of enduring pain, deprivation, and death without hesitation. By the time they reached adulthood, these young men had been transformed into some of the most disciplined soldiers in history, living embodiments of Spartan ideals. This uncompromising system was not without its cost, however. While it created highly effective warriors, it also dehumanized individuals, stripping away their sense of personal identity in favor of a singular, unwavering loyalty to the Spartan collective. Every Spartan man's life was subordinated to the state, and his worth was measured only by his ability to fight and serve Sparta. This intense focus on military superiority created a culture where personal sacrifice was the norm, and the fear of failure was as powerful a motivator as the desire for victory. Yet, Sparta's military prowess did not rest solely upon the discipline of its soldiers. At the heart of the Spartan state was the helot system, an institution that allowed the Spartan warriors to devote themselves fully to military training, while a vast underclass of enslaved people worked the land, cultivated crops, and maintained the economy. The helots, primarily made up of the Messenian population, were enslaved after the conquest of Messenia, and their numbers far exceeded those of the Spartan citizens. This created a potentially volatile situation, one where the helots, who were subjected to brutal treatment and constant oppression, could revolt and overthrow their masters. The helots' role in Spartan society was critical. Without their labor, the Spartan citizenry would not have had the time to train for war. The warriors could focus exclusively on their military duties, while the helots provided the agricultural and economic foundation of the state. They were forced to work the fields and were treated as property rather than as people, bound to the land they tilled. The subjugation of the helots was harsh. They were required to live in constant fear of Spartan control and were subjected to brutal punishment, including public humiliation, violence, and even death. Spartans could kill helots without consequence if they were deemed a threat. This system was designed to instill fear in the helots, preventing uprisings and maintaining total dominance over them. Spartan society, despite its focus on military training and discipline, could not have existed without the helots' labor. Their forced subjugation allowed Sparta to maintain its unique militaristic culture. In times of peace, the Spartans would send young warriors, known as the Cryptaea, to police the helots, ensuring they remained obedient. The Cryptaea also had a more sinister role. During periods of tension, they would hunt down and execute any helots suspected of disloyalty, keeping the population in check through fear and violence. The relationship between Spartans and helots was one of absolute control, and it was essential for maintaining the Spartan state. Without the labor of the Helots, Sparta would have been unable to sustain its military elite. But, in turn, the constant threat of Helot rebellion was a constant undercurrent in Spartan life, influencing their political, military, and social structures. The militaristic ethos of Spartan society was inextricably tied to the oppression of the Helots, a fact that underscores the inherent contradictions in Sparta's seemingly perfect system of warrior dominance. The Helots' role in Spartan society, therefore, was more than that of mere laborers. They were the economic engine that allowed Sparta's warriors to focus on battle. The fear of revolt from the Helots also acted as a powerful reminder of the fragility of Sparta's militaristic system, a tension that simmered beneath the surface of Spartan society. The relationship between the Spartans and the Helots was a defining feature of their culture, reinforcing the need for military readiness and the constant vigilance that the Spartan way of life demanded. The Persian Wars, one of the most pivotal conflicts in ancient history, were not a result of a singular event, but rather the culmination of centuries of growing tension, ambition, and resistance. While the Ionian Revolt in 499 BCE marked the immediate spark for the conflict, the true causes of the war lay much deeper within the vast geopolitical landscape of the ancient world. This was not simply a battle between two peoples, but a clash of civilizations. The Persian Empire, an expansive and authoritarian force under Darius I, and the Greek city-states, fiercely independent and rooted in their own ideals of freedom and self-governance. The rise of Persian imperialism under Darius I was driven by a desire to consolidate power and extend the reach of the Achaemenid Empire. For centuries, Persia had been steadily expanding its borders, conquering lands from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea. With the Greek cities of Asia Minor, particularly the Ionian Greek cities along the coast of what is now Turkey, coming under Persian control, Darius set his sights on the Greek mainland itself. Persia's ambition was to extend its empire to the shores of the Aegean and beyond, and the Greeks, with their deeply embedded sense of freedom and autonomy, stood as a direct threat to this imperial project. The Ionian Revolt, which began in 499 BCE, was the immediate cause of the war, but it was rooted in a broader context of Persian expansionism and the unrest among Greek subjects under Persian rule. The Ionians, who had long suffered under Persian rule and its local tyrants, seized upon a rare opportunity when Aristogoras of Miletus sought aid from Athens and Eretria. Athens, eager to assert its role as a leading Greek power, provided military support, sending ships to assist in the rebellion. While the revolt ultimately failed, it sent a message to Darius I. The Greek city-states were willing to challenge Persian authority, and they were not content to be ruled as subjects. Enraged by this Greek interference in the Ionian Revolt, Darius swore vengeance on the cities of Athens and Eretria. The Persian king's decision to wage war against Greece was not just a response to the revolt, but part of a larger imperial strategy to quash resistance and maintain control over the far-reaching provinces of the Persian Empire. The Persian Wars had become inevitable. The stage was set for an epic clash between Persian imperial might and the fiercely independent Greek city-states. The first great confrontation between the Persian Empire and the Greek city-states occurred at the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE, an event that would resonate through history as a symbol of Greek unity, resilience, and military ingenuity. Darius I sent his forces, a massive army composed primarily of Persian infantry and cavalry, to subdue Athens and punish them for their role in the Ionian Revolt. The Persians landed at Marathon, just 26 miles from Athens, with the intention of overwhelming the outnumbered Greek forces and marching on the city itself. The Greek army, composed of Athenian hoplites, heavily armed foot soldiers, and a small contingent of Plataean allies, was vastly outnumbered, with estimates placing the Persian force at around 25,000 men, compared to fewer than 10,000 Greeks. Despite the odds, the Greeks were determined to defend their autonomy. Under the leadership of Miltiades, a former general in the Persian army, the Greeks chose to engage the Persians in open battle, but they did so with an innovative strategy that would prove decisive. Miltiades recognized the strength of the Persian archers and their reliance on long-range missile attacks. He knew that the Persian infantry, while numerous, lacked the tight cohesion of the Greek hoplite phalanx, a battle formation that emphasized discipline, strength, and close combat. Miltiades thus narrowed the center of the Greek line, making it vulnerable but heavily reinforcing the flanks. This strategy invited the Persians to press forward, but once the Persians engaged with the Greeks' dire center, the Greeks struck with ferocity on the wings. As the Persians attempted to retreat, the Greeks closed in, trapping them on the Marathon plain. The Greek victory was both a military triumph and a psychological one. It showed that even the mighty Persian Empire, with its vast resources, could be defeated by the strategy, discipline, and resolve of a smaller, united army. For the Greeks, it was a confirmation of their belief in self-determination and independence, and a testament to the power of their citizen soldiers over the might of a distant empire. The victory at Marathon gave birth to the concept of heroic resistance and the idea that freedom, not just military prowess, was worth fighting for. Marathon was also symbolic of Greek unity in the face of a common enemy. While Greek city-states often bickered and fought amongst themselves, the Persian threat forced them to set aside their differences and come together for a common cause. The unity achieved at Marathon, though short-lived, served as a powerful reminder of the potential strength of the Greek world when it stood united. The battle also instilled a deep sense of pride in the Greeks, particularly in Athens, and it would go down in history as a defining moment of Greek identity, one that elevated the Athenian spirit and set the stage for the city-state's future rise as a beacon of democracy and cultural flourishing. The year was 480 BCE, and the Greek world stood on the brink of destruction. The mighty Persian Empire, led by Xerxes I, had amassed one of the largest armies and navies the world had ever seen. With the fall of Athens and the impending invasion of mainland Greece, all seemed lost. Yet, in the narrow pass of Thermopylae, a small force of Spartan warriors and their Greek allies stood against the tide of Persian aggression, embodying the ultimate ideal of sacrifice and courage. At the heart of this heroic stand was King Leonidas I of Sparta, a man who, though vastly outnumbered, chose to face death rather than surrender. As the Persian army, numbering anywhere between 100,000 to 200,000 men, advanced toward Greece, Leonidas and his army of 300 Spartan hoplites, alongside a few thousand allied Greek soldiers, made their stand in the Thermopylae Pass, a narrow strip of land between the mountains and the sea. The geography of the area, with its steep cliffs and tight corridors, meant that the superior numbers of the Persians would be rendered less effective, forcing the battle into a confined space where Greek warriors could fight with their usual discipline and formidable skill. For 3 days, the Greek force held its ground, fiercely repelling wave after wave of Persian attacks. Leonidas's decision to fight, even when the odds were clearly stacked against him, was not one born of folly, but of sacrifice. His action symbolized the Spartan ideal of selflessness for the good of the city-state. In Spartan culture, the greatest honor was to die in battle for one's country, for the state's survival. Leonidas's leadership demonstrated this value in the most extreme way. His men fought not for personal glory or survival, but for the freedom of Greece and the preservation of their way of life. However, the outcome of the battle was inevitable. After the Greek force was betrayed by a Greek traitor, Ephialtes, who revealed a secret mountain path that allowed the Persians to flank the Greek position, Leonidas and his men were surrounded. Despite the hopeless situation, Leonidas made the fateful decision to remain, sending the majority of the Greek forces to safety, while he and his 300 Spartans, along with a small contingent of Thespians and Thebans, chose to fight to the death. The sacrifice of Leonidas and his warriors has since become one of the most powerful symbols of heroism in world history, encapsulating the idea that defending one's country, even at the cost of life, is the highest form of duty and honor. The Battle of Thermopylae became a rallying cry for all of Greece. Though the Greeks lost the battle, the bravery and unwavering resolve of Leonidas and his warriors inspired the Greek city-states to unite against the Persian threat. The stand at Thermopylae was not just a military engagement, but a moral victory, a demonstration of the power of self-sacrifice and the indomitable will to resist tyranny. It embodied the Greek ideals of freedom, honor, and unity against overwhelming odds. In the face of death, Leonidas and his warriors showed the world that the spirit of liberty was something worth dying for. While the stand at Thermopylae echoed the valor and sacrifice of individual warriors, the fate of Greece was not decided on land, but on the waters of the Aegean Sea. The Battle of Salamis, fought just a few weeks after Thermopylae, was a turning point in the Persian Wars, one that would decide the future of the Greek city-states and their freedom from Persian tyranny. By the time the battle took place in 480 BCE, the Persian navy, under the command of Xerxes, had already defeated the Greek fleets at Artemisium, and the Persian forces had set their sights on the heart of Greek civilization, Athens. Xerxes believed that the key to conquering Greece lay in the complete destruction of Athens, and he ordered his navy to sail toward the city, intending to destroy the Athenian fleet and crush Greek morale once and for all. However, the Greeks, led by Themistocles, a brilliant Athenian general and strategist, had a different plan. Themistocles had long recognized that naval superiority was the key to defeating Persia. Through careful diplomacy and strategic foresight, he convinced the Greek city-states to unite and fight the Persian navy in the narrow straits of Salamis, an area where the superior numbers of the Persian fleet would be less effective. Themistocles knew that the narrow waters would prevent the larger Persian ships from maneuvering freely, giving the Greek triremes, smaller, faster, and more agile, an advantage in combat. Themistocles' genius was in his ability to manipulate not just the terrain, but also the psychology of the Persian leaders. Themistocles sent a deceptive message to Xerxes, pretending to be sympathetic to the Persian cause, leading the Persian king to believe that the Greeks were retreating to the island of Salamis. Xerxes, believing he had cornered the Greeks, took the bait and ordered his fleet to pursue the Greek ships into the narrow channel of Salamis. When the battle commenced, the Greek navy used the narrowness of the straits to its advantage. The Persian ships, far larger and less maneuverable, struggled to navigate the crowded waters. The Greek triremes, with their swift and precise movements, were able to ram the Persian ships and break their lines. In the chaos that followed, the Greek forces shattered the Persian navy, sinking or capturing hundreds of ships. Xerxes, who had watched the battle unfold from a nearby hillside, was left stunned and humiliated as his navy was routed. The Greek victory at Salamis was a crucial moment in the Persian Wars, for it not only dealt a devastating blow to Persian naval power, but also boosted Greek morale. Themistocles' tactics had transformed the Greek navy into a formidable force, and his victory ensured that the Persian invasion was no longer inevitable. The Greek unity in the face of an overwhelming enemy had been solidified, and the survival of Athens and the other Greek city-states became more attainable. Salamis was also a victory of wit over might, a demonstration of how a smaller, less powerful force could triumph through clever tactics and strategy. The Greek navy, although outnumbered and less powerful in terms of raw strength, proved that strategy, adaptability, and the unity of free peoples could defeat even the might of the Persian Empire. The Battle of Salamis showed that the Greeks were not simply fighting for land, but for freedom, and their victory became a defining moment in the establishment of Greek identity and the idea that intelligence and cunning could overcome brute force. In the wake of the Persian Wars, Greece emerged victorious, but the cost of their triumph was immeasurable. The Persian Empire, though defeated, remained a formidable presence on the eastern horizon, and the Greek city-states, scattered and fractured, were left to grapple with the consequences of the invasion. It was in this moment of post-war uncertainty that the idea of cooperation began to take shape, leading to the formation of the Delian League, an alliance that would soon place Athens at the heart of the Greek world. The Delian League, established in 478 BCE, was born out of necessity. After the Persian defeat at Salamis and Plataea, Greek city-states understood that the threat from Persia was not entirely gone. In fact, the Persian Empire's ambitions were far from over, and the idea of a unified defense against future Persian aggression began to take hold. Under the leadership of Athens, a new alliance was formed with the aim of protecting Greek interests and securing the Aegean Sea from Persian influence. The League was named after the island of Delos, where the treasury was initially housed, and it was meant to be a collective effort to maintain the security of the Greek world. However, the reality of the Delian League soon diverged from its original purpose. Athens, leveraging its naval supremacy, began to assert its influence over the League's members. While the League's initial aim was to provide mutual defense, Athens quickly transformed the Delian League into an extension of its own power. The Athenians, with their superior fleet and military prowess, began to dominate the other city-states, demanding tribute and military service from the League members. What began as a voluntary alliance for mutual protection gradually shifted into a more coercive, Athenian-led empire. By 454 BCE, the Athenian dominance over the Delian League was unmistakable. The treasury, once kept on the neutral ground of Delos, was moved to Athens, symbolizing the growing power and influence of the city-state. The Athenians began to use the League's resources not only for defense, but to finance the construction of grand projects in Athens, including the Parthenon. Athens' growing power alienated some of the smaller members of the League, but for the most part, it allowed the city-state to dominate the political and military affairs of the Greek world. Athens' rise as the dominant power was also bolstered by its influence over the arts, philosophy, and culture, which were further fostered by the wealth and stability afforded by its leadership of the League. The city-state's economic and military strength allowed it to support a burgeoning intellectual and artistic renaissance, shaping not only Greece but the entire Mediterranean world. Athens had, in a sense, become the heart of Greek civilization. Its political power and cultural achievements intertwined in a way that ensured its central position for decades to come. As Athens grew in political, military strength, it also became the intellectual and cultural center of the Greek world. The period following the Persian Wars, often referred to as the Golden Age of Athens, was one of unparalleled achievement in art, architecture, philosophy, and literature. Under the leadership of Pericles, Athens reached its peak in every aspect of cultural life, leaving a legacy that continues to shape Western civilization to this day. At the heart of Athens' golden age was the construction of the Parthenon, the iconic temple dedicated to Athena, the city's patron goddess. This magnificent structure, built on the Acropolis, symbolized Athens' wealth, power, and devotion to the gods. The Parthenon was not just an architectural wonder, it was a manifestation of Athenian pride, a public display of the city's cultural and military supremacy. Its sculptural masterpieces, most notably the Parthenon marbles, created by Phidias, elevated Greek art to new heights, setting the standard for future artistic endeavors. In philosophy, Athens became the birthplace of some of the most influential ideas in human history. The period saw the rise of towering figures like Socrates, whose method of dialectical questioning laid the foundation for Western philosophical thought. Plato, his student, furthered this tradition with his theories of ideal forms and the establishment of the academy, the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. Aristotle, Plato's student, made groundbreaking contributions to ethics, politics, biology, and metaphysics, profoundly influencing countless fields of study for centuries. The Socratic method, emphasizing critical thinking and the pursuit of knowledge through dialogue, became the cornerstone of Western educational systems, shaping the intellectual landscape of the future. Athens was also the cradle of Greek drama, theatre that would become one of the most influential cultural traditions in history. The works of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides were performed in the great open-air theatres of Athens, where citizens gathered not only for entertainment, but to reflect on human nature, morality, and the complexities of the divine and human worlds. These playwrights pioneered the use of tragedy and comedy to explore the depths of the human experience, creating works that would be performed for millennia to come. The themes of hubris, fate, and the interaction between mortals and gods remain central to Western literary tradition. Athens was also home to the development of rhetoric, the art of persuasive speaking. Demosthenes, Pericles, and other great orators elevated speech to a sophisticated art form, using rhetoric to shape public opinion, sway assemblies, and influence political outcomes. The Athenian assembly, where male citizens gathered to vote on major political decisions, was a space where the power of speech and debate shaped the very foundation of the Athenian democracy. These practices of public discourse would influence political systems across the world for centuries, laying the groundwork for the development of representative government. Athens' intellectual achievements were complemented by a flourishing of art and sculpture. The city was home to great artists such as Polyclitus and Myron, whose works focused on the human form, capturing its beauty and idealized symmetry. Their sculptures embodied the Greek ideal of balance, harmony, and proportion, principles that were central not only to Greek art, but to Greek philosophy as well. The development of these artistic techniques would influence Western art for generations, from the Renaissance to the present day. In science, the Golden Age of Athens saw significant advancements, especially in the fields of mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Pythagoras, Euclid, and Archimedes laid the foundations for the scientific methods and discoveries that would shape the course of Western knowledge. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, introduced the idea that disease had natural causes and could be treated by empirical methods, a revolutionary concept that marked a departure from reliance on the supernatural. The intellectual and cultural achievements of Athens during its golden age were not confined to the arts and philosophy alone. They also had a profound impact on political thought. The development of Athenian democracy, with its emphasis on direct citizen participation, laid the groundwork for later democratic systems in the Western world. The principles of freedom, equality before the law, and civic responsibility that were championed by Athenian statesmen like Pericles became the bedrock of modern democratic ideals. Athens' golden age was a period of remarkable achievement and intellectual flourishing, one that shaped not only the future of Greece, but also the course of Western civilization. The cultural and intellectual contributions of Athens continue to reverberate today, providing the foundation for much of our thinking on politics, ethics, art, and philosophy. The city's achievements during this period remain a testament to the enduring power of human creativity, reason, and the pursuit of knowledge, marking Athens as one of the greatest civilizations to ever exist. Thank you for watching this story until the end. If you found this one captivating, you're in for a treat with the next one. It's just as fascinating, if not more, than you could ever imagine. Don't miss out. Click on the image on your screen now to dive into the next adventure.